the wind in the high plains of Nebraska, reaching down toward the Texas Panhandle, never stopped talking. It was the late 1870s, and the wind spoke of change. It whispered through the blue stem and grama grass so tall it brushed the bellies of the horses, and it carried the scent of iron. The railroad was coming. It pushed west like a spear, laying down iron spines that cut the buffalo grazing lands in half. Alongside it, humming a high, thin song that frightened the antelope, ran the telegraph wire, a single strand of copper cutting across 1,000,000 acres of sky, promising connection but delivering demands. Tahan heard the hum. He stood on a low rise, his black hair loose in the wind, watching the herd of mustangs he tended. He was Comanche, though his skin was a shade lighter than his cousins, a fact that had marked his 26 winters with a quiet complexity. He had, for a time, worn the blue coat of the cavalry. He had been a scout, valued for his ability to read the land, to track shadows, to know the difference between dust raised by wind and dust raised by shod horses. He had learned the white man's tongue, his ways of war, and his endless, hungry lines on paper. He had left them 2 years prior. He had returned the government horse, the saddle, and the rifle, and walked back to his people, carrying only the debt of his service. He had seen too much. He had seen how treaties were broken, how lines on maps murdered the truth of the land, how the railroad and the wire were not tools of progress, but hammers to break the world he knew. Now he was home, or what passed for home. His people were gathered in the summer camps in the Redwater Valley, a sanctuary of good water and cottonwoods that the lines on the maps had, so far, missed. He tended the horses, the true wealth of the people. He hunted. He watched the horizon. He carried the burden of his past and a heavy promise to the elders to protect their right to move, their right to exist on the land that had always been theirs. Even as the iron fences and the angry plows bit deeper into the prairie, he was a man caught between the thunder of the buffalo and the shriek of the steam engine. Miles to the east, closer to the raw scar of the new railroad towns, Evelyn Carter threw dirty water from a bucket into the dust. The wind caught the spray and threw it back at her, cold and gritty. She was 24, and the owner of 160 acres of dust and determination. Her homestead was small, a sod house dug into the earth and a rough lumber barn that leaned like a drunkard. It was all that was left of her father's ambitions. He had been a rancher, a man with big dreams, until his horse had supposedly stumbled in a prairie dog town, breaking his neck. Evelyn knew better. Her father had been a careful man, and he had been in a dispute over water rights. She lived alone, a fact that scandalized the women in town and invited quiet speculation from the men. But Evelyn was capable. She wore her father's canvas trousers, not a corset. She knew how to set a fence post, how to read a brand, and how to use the Winchester rifle that leaned by her door. She used it only for defense, for coyotes, or the occasional wolf. She was not a fighter by nature. She was a survivor by necessity. But her rifle was not her only secret. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her sod house, wrapped in oilcloth, were her books, not novels, but a heavy Gray's Anatomy, a text on pharmacology, and stacks of medical journals sent from Philadelphia. She was, in the quiet hours after sunset, studying to be a healer. She practiced sutures on scrap leather and memorized the properties of yarrow and willow bark. And she had another secret, one more dangerous than her medical books. Evelyn Carter was a correspondent. She wrote articles under a man's name for the Eastern Sentinel, a paper interested in the taming of the West. But she was not writing about barn raisings and wildflowers. She was an investigator, quietly documenting the systematic theft of land. She was collecting the threads of a conspiracy, watching how the new laws, the railroad grants, and the local political offices were being woven into a net to steal the plains. She was watching the men who held the scissors. The hub of this new West was Copper Crossing. It was less a town than an argument with the prairie, a collection of false-fronted buildings huddled against the wind. It had a dry goods store, a livery, a blacksmith, and 3 saloons, the most important buildings. However, were the telegraph and post office, and the squat brick office of Sheriff Boyd. Copper Crossing was a nervous town. It was waiting for the railroad spur, and that waiting made men greedy. Into this nervous air rode Jasper Hale. Hale did not arrive covered in trail dust, driving cattle. He arrived in a polished carriage, wearing a clean suit. He was a cattle baron from the East, a man who spoke of civilization and investment. He talked of jobs, of building a proper stockyard, of bringing order. He was handsome, his voice smooth, and he bought rounds of drinks at the Golden Slipper Saloon. With him came his men, led by a man named Riker. Riker was the opposite of Hale. He was a man who looked like he had been carved from gristle, with eyes that never settled. He did not speak of civilization. He was the muscle, the man who translated Hale's polite requests into blunt threats. Sheriff Boyd, a man who preferred his chair tilted back and his boots on his desk, suddenly became very active. He was often seen walking with Hale, nodding, sharing a cigar. The law in Copper Crossing, which had always been lazy, now felt like it was listening to a new master. Tahan saw the change. He had business in town, trading cured hides for flour and coffee. He did not enter the saloon. He was not welcome, and he had no desire for whiskey. He was standing by the livery, checking the shod hooves of his pack mule, when he heard Riker's voice. Riker was talking to a man Tahan did not know, a man with clean hands and spectacles, who carried the tripod and transit of a surveyor. Tahan was practiced in the art of being invisible. He kept his head down, tending to the mule, and listened. "Mr. Hale wants the Redwater Valley sectioned by the new moon," Riker said, his voice a low growl. "Your map makes it legal." The surveyor, the railroad engineer, sounded nervous. But the existing surveys and the homestead claims, not to mention the Comanche summer camps. Riker laughed, a harsh sound like rocks grinding together. "Maps are just stories. Friend, Hale wants a new story, one where his beef graze from here to the horizon. That valley is prime water. Homesteaders move, Indians vanish. That is what maps are for. You just make sure the lines are drawn where I told you." Tahan's hand paused on the mule's flank. Redwater Valley, a new map. He knew exactly what that meant. It meant the theft of his people's sanctuary. It meant the end of the homesteaders, too. He finished his work, loaded his supplies, and rode out of Copper Crossing, the surveyor's nervous agreement echoing in his head. Evelyn, meanwhile, was working on her own puzzle. She sat at her small table, the lamplight casting a yellow circle on her notes. She was piecing together the network. Jasper Hale was the money. Sheriff Boyd was the badge. Riker was the gun. But she was missing the fourth leg of the stool, the mechanism. How could Hale legally claim land that was already deeded, or land that was, by treaty, open to the Comanche? The answer, she suspected, lay with the railroad. The government grants gave them wide swaths of land, and their surveys were becoming the new law. If a survey could be altered, if the stone markers and boundary posts could be corrected, then land could be stolen with a pen, backed by Boyd's gun. She had been watching the new railroad engineer who was staying at the hotel. He was supposed to be mapping the spur line, but she had seen him twice, riding out toward the Redwater Valley with Riker, without his full crew. She pulled out her father's old ledgers. Her father had been meticulous. She ran her finger down the pages, and she found it, a payment, dated 1 week before her father's accident. A consultation fee of $50, paid to Sheriff Boyd. The chill she felt had nothing to do with the night air. The air on the plains grew heavy. The wind carried the metallic smell of distant rain, a promise of moisture that might not arrive for days. The last scattered herds of buffalo moved restlessly, sensing the change in the sky, sensing the iron on the ground. In the Redwater Valley, Tahan reported what he had heard to the elders. There was quiet anger, but no surprise. It was the same story, told with new words. On her homestead, Evelyn Carter cleaned her Winchester, her movements precise and mechanical. She loaded her small, cumbersome photography equipment into a saddlebag. The collodion process was difficult, wet, and messy, but the glass plates did not lie. She needed more than notes. She needed proof. Both of them, separated by miles of rustling grass, felt the same pressing weight. They were solitary, vigilant, and standing in the path of a machine that intended to crush them. The West was changing, and the fight for its soul was about to begin. The stagecoach bucked and groaned, its iron-bound wheels finding every rut in the trail. Evelyn Carter sat beside the driver, a man named Silas, choosing the wind and the dust over the stifling air inside the coach. She had her leather satchel tucked securely between her boot and the wagon box. It contained her proof copies of the original homestead surveys, her own meticulous notes on the discrepancies, and 2 damning pages she had copied from the railroad engineer's stray notebook. They were descending a long, shallow grade flanked by low, broken hills when she saw the dust. It was not the lazy plume of a distant herd. It was 3 columns, sharp and angry, converging on the trail ahead. Silas saw it too. He pulled his hat low. "That ain't friendly, Miss Carter," he said, his voice flat. He cracked his whip over the 6-horse team, urging them from a trot to a jarring gallop. The riders topped the last rise. They were white men, hard-looking, and they fanned out, not slowing. Evelyn recognized Riker at their head. Her stomach went cold. They knew she had the papers. A shot cracked the air. It was not aimed at them, but at the lead horses. The sound was flat, ugly. Another shot splintered the wood of the wagon box near Evelyn's feet. "Get inside," Silas roared. Evelyn ignored him. She unhooked her Winchester from the scabbard by her knee. She was not a gunfighter, but she knew how to use the weapon. She levered around into the chamber, aimed high, and fired a warning shot over their heads. One of the riders laughed. They kept coming. Riker bellowed, "Pull up, Silas! We just want the bag!" Silas cursed, sawing on the reins. But the horses were panicked, running blind. Evelyn saw Riker raise his pistol again, this time aiming not high, but level. He fired. Silas grunted, a sound like a man being punched in the gut. He slumped forward, his grip on the reins going slack. The heavy leather lines fell, tangling near the frantic hooves of the wheel horses. "No!" Evelyn screamed. She lunged, grabbing for the reins, but they were gone, whipping in the dust. She was alone on the box of a runaway coach, its driver dead or dying beside her, with Riker's men closing in. She made a desperate choice. Ahead, the trail curved sharply around a deep, rocky arroyo. To stay on the trail meant capture. She pulled on the brake lever with all her strength, but it was not enough. Instead, she grabbed the tangled end of the right-hand rein and pulled, hauling the team off the road, aiming for the rough, broken ground. It was a reckless move. The heavy coach tilted, balanced for a moment on 2 wheels, and then, with a sound of screaming wood and tearing metal, it gave up. The axle cracked, the coach cartwheeled, flipping over on its side and sliding, a wreck of splintered lumber and shrieking horses, down the dusty embankment toward the gully. Evelyn was thrown clear of the box, but her leg was caught, pinned beneath the heavy, shattered roof. Pain, bright and sharp, shot up her side. The world spun in a cloud of alkali dust. She heard the horses screaming. She heard Riker's men shouting from the ridge above, and she saw her satchel, thrown 20 feet from her, lying in the open near the edge of the deep arroyo. Tahan had been tracking the hawk. It was his guide. Where the hawk hunted, there was water, and where there was water, the railroad surveyors would go. He had been following the engineer for 2 days, watching from a distance as the man and Riker's men moved stone markers, piling new rocks, destroying old ones. He was on a high ridge when he saw the stagecoach. He saw the ambush. He recognized Riker. He saw the woman fire the rifle. He saw the driver fall and the coach plunge off the trail. He moved his Mustang without a sound, keeping to the low draws, the horse picking its way through the shale. He was not a savior. He was a scout. He came up on the ridge, 200 yards west of the ambush, the sun at his back. He saw the scene below, the wrecked coach, a tangle of dead and dying horses, Riker and 2 other men dismounting, scrambling down the slope toward the woman. She was trapped. They were not moving to help her. They were fanning out, their eyes searching the ground. "Find the bag," Riker shouted. Tahan had 4 cartridges for his rifle. A fight here was suicide. He looked at the attackers' horses, left ground hitched on the ridge. He looked at the sun, low and blinding. He looked at the loose dust on the embankment. He slipped off his horse. He moved like smoke, downwind, until he was just above and behind the tethered horses. He gave a sharp, piercing cry, the shriek of a red-tailed hawk. In the same motion, he slapped the rump of Riker's black horse hard with his hand. The animals, already nervous from the gunfire, exploded into motion. They bolted, reins flying, galloping back the way they had come. "The horses!" one of the men below yelled, turning. "Damn it!" Riker roared. "Let them go, get the bag!" But the distraction was all Tahan needed. He did not run down the slope. He slid, using the loose scree, coming down in a cloud of dust, placing himself between Riker's men and the wreck. Evelyn saw him appear through the settling dust, a Comanche, materializing from the earth, knife at his belt, rifle in his hand. She thought he was the leader, the man Riker worked for. Her hand clawed for the pistol she could not reach. "Stay back!" she yelled, her voice hoarse. Riker, blinded by the low sun reflecting off the dust Tahan had raised, fired a shot. It went wide. "Who in hell are you?" Tahan did not answer. He ignored Riker. He saw Evelyn, her leg pinned. He saw the satchel, the object of the fight, and he saw Riker's other man making a dash for it. Tahan moved. He kicked a spray of gravel and hot dust directly at Riker's face, momentarily blinding him. In the same instant, he threw his heavy skinning knife. He was not aiming to kill. The knife spun, catching the second man in the thick muscle of his forearm. The man shrieked, dropping his pistol, clutching his bleeding arm. "Yin, get the bag," Evelyn screamed at Tahan, still believing he was there to rob her. Tahan spared her a single, cold look. He ran to the wreck, put his shoulder under the splintered roof beam, and heaved. The wood was heavy, unmoving. "Push," he commanded. Evelyn, desperate, pushed against the ground. Tahan strained, the muscles in his back and shoulders bunching. The beam lifted. Just inches. Evelyn screamed as she dragged her leg free. It was raw, bleeding, the thick canvas of her trousers torn, but she could move. She scrambled, grabbing the satchel. Riker was wiping the dust from his eyes. He saw his man wounded, his horses gone, and this new Indian, rifle now in hand. He made his decision. "It is not worth it," he shouted, backing up the slope, pulling his wounded man with him. "We will get it in town, Copper Crossing tonight." They disappeared over the ridge. Silence fell, broken only by the hot wind and the groan of the dying coach. Tahan walked over and retrieved his knife, wiping the blade clean on the tough grass. Evelyn clutched the satchel to her chest, her body shaking, her leg throbbed. She looked at the dead driver. She looked at this silent, lethal man. "Who are you?" she asked. "You are the one with answers." Tahan said. His voice was low, rough. He looked at the satchel. "Riker wants that." "You know him," she whispered. "I know his kind." He looked at her clothes, her face. She was not from this land. "You are from the land office. You come to draw lines on our water." "No," she said, offended and afraid. "I am not. They are my father's papers. They are all I have left." Tahan's face was impassive. He did not believe her. He had seen her lie. He had heard Riker. He had heard the surveyor. He turned his back on her. "I am leaving." "You cannot," she cried, panic rising in her. "You cannot just leave me here. They will come back. He said Copper Crossing. They will be waiting." He stopped. He looked back at her. A lone woman, her leg bleeding, clutching a bag that men would kill for. He owed her nothing. She was a white woman, and her kind had brought nothing but misery to his. But Riker was a different matter. To leave her to Riker was to feed a wolf. He nodded, once, curtly. "I will get my horse." He climbed the embankment and vanished. Evelyn was alone for less than a minute. Her mind raced. He was not with them. He had saved her, but he was suspicious of her, and she of him. He had seen the satchel. And Riker was right. They would be waiting in Copper Crossing. They would search the whole town. They would search her. They would take the bag. Tahan returned, leading his paint mustang, a tough, wary-looking animal. He dismounted and turned his back to her, checking the cinch strap, preparing the horse to take her weight. In that moment, she moved. His bedroll was tied tight behind the saddle. Next to it, a parfleche pouch, painted with Comanche designs, held his gear. It was his auxiliary bag. Her fingers, shaking but fast, fumbled with the leather tie. She looked at the satchel. She looked at his back. It was a terrible gamble, but he was the only chance she had. He was not with Riker, and he was not from the town. He was an outsider. She shoved the stiff, heavy satchel deep into his pouch, forcing it down, praying it would fit. She pulled the flap over and fumbled with the tie, securing it with a knot that was clumsy and wrong. Tahan turned around. He saw her standing there, swaying on her good leg. Her hands were empty. His eyes narrowed. "Where are the papers?" She lied, pointing to the gully. I hid them under the rocks, where they fell. They will not find them there." His gaze swept over her, then to the gully, then back. He knew she was lying. He could see the fear in her eyes, the desperate, brittle energy. But he heard Riker's voice in his head. "Copper Crossing. Tonight. There was no time." He moved to her, sliding one arm under her legs, the other behind her back. He lifted her. She was lighter than he expected. He placed her on the horse, then swung up behind her, settling into the saddle. He took the reins. The horse shifted under their combined weight. They rode in silence, Tahan setting a steady, ground-eating pace. He did not ride toward Copper Crossing. He rode east, toward her homestead, the one she had pointed out to him once on a ride weeks ago. He stopped the horse on a low rise, a quarter-mile from her sod house. "You can walk from here," he said. His voice was not unkind, but it was not friendly. It was empty. She slid off the horse, landing hard on her good leg, biting back a cry of pain. She looked up at him, this man who had saved her life and who looked at her as if she were a snake. "I thank you," she said. He just looked at her. Then he turned the paint mustang and rode away, heading north toward the Redwater Valley. Evelyn limped toward her small house, the silence of the prairie pressing in on her, the weight of the coming night heavy on her shoulders. Tahan rode for an hour. The sun was a red ember on the horizon. He pushed the horse, wanting to put miles between himself and the woman, and the trouble that followed her. But the mustang was fighting him, tossing its head, its stride uneven. He slowed, then stopped, dismounting in the tall grass. He ran a hand down the horse's legs, checking for a stone, a strain. Nothing. The hooves were fine. He checked his saddle. It was secure. Then he saw it. His parfleche pouch. It was bulging, angled wrong. The knot was not his. His knot was a running loop. This was a hard, square knot. A cold anger washed through him. He untied the clumsy knot and pulled the flap open. He reached inside, and his fingers hit the hard, tooled leather of her satchel. He pulled it out. He stared at it. She had lied. She had used him. She had made him carry the very thing Riker was killing for. He should have left her. He should throw the bag into a buffalo wallow. He sat on a rock, the heavy satchel in his lap. The wind was cold now. Copper Crossing. Tonight. If Riker wanted this, and if the woman lied to protect it, then it was important. He thought of the surveyor. He thought of the new map Riker had demanded, the map that would steal the Redwater Valley. He had to know. He had given his word to the elders. He opened the clasp. His decision was made. He would return the bag to her. But first, he would see. He pulled out the contents. There were the survey copies, just as she had said. Pages of notes in her neat, precise handwriting. Calculations. Dates. And then he found the other papers, rolled and tied with a string. He untied it. They were telegrams, copies, written in her hand, and they were coded. He could not read the code, but he did not need to. The names were there, written in the clear. Hale, Boyd, engineer, and the place names: Redwater Valley, Spurline, Marker 7. Then he found the drawing. It was not a formal survey map. It was a sketch, but it was detailed. It showed the valley. It showed the true path of the red water. And it showed a new, proposed path, drawn in red ink. This new path diverted the entire creek away from the Comanche summer camps, away from the small homesteads, and fed it directly into a massive, square parcel of land. A parcel of land marked in bold letters Hale. This was the map. This was the theft. He put everything back, exactly as he had found it. He closed the satchel. The woman, Evelyn Carter, was not from the land office. She was not stealing land. She was fighting the thieves. And she had, by accident, given him the very weapon he needed. He got back on his horse. He did not ride north to the valley. He turned his horse and rode hard through the twilight, toward Copper Crossing. Copper Crossing was a town lit by kerosene and fear. By the time Riker and his wounded man staggered into the Golden Slipper saloon, the story was already half written. Riker, clutching his bleeding arm and ordering whiskey with a hoarse shout, just provided the ink. A war party. He spat, blood and whiskey staining his beard. Hit the stage. Silas is dead. They came out of the rocks, a dozen of them, maybe more. Men lowered their glasses. The piano player stopped, his fingers hovering over the keys. Sheriff Boyd pushed himself up from his corner table, his chair scraping the floor. He was a thick man, his authority resting on a star pinned to a dirty vest and the weight of his gut. A war party? You sure, Riker? Comanche, Riker said, nodding to his man, who was pale and sweating. They shot Tom here, took a bag of papers. Mail, I reckon. They scalped Silas. He added that last part for effect. Silas was dead, but he was not scalped. It did not matter. Comanche, Boyd repeated, the word hanging in the smoky air. He let the silence build. I warned this town. I said letting them run wild in the Redwater was a mistake. A man in suspenders, a homesteader named Svensson, spoke up. Tahan's people are in the summer camp. They are peaceful. Riker slammed his glass down. Peaceful, tell that to Silas. Tell that to Tom's arm. They were painted. They wanted those papers. Into this silence walked Jasper Hale. He was the opposite of the room. He was clean, his suit black wool, his boots polished. He smelled of bay rum. He surveyed the scene, his gaze landing on Riker with mild disappointment. Gentlemen, please, Hale said, his voice smooth and measured. Panic solves nothing. Sheriff, what is the situation? A Comanche raid? Mr. Hale, Boyd said, playing his part perfectly. They murdered the stage driver and stole the mail. They are a threat to public safety. Hale sighed, as if burdened by this unfortunate turn of events. This is precisely what I feared. This is wild country. It needs a firm hand. It needs order. He moved to the center of the bar, commanding the room. I came here to invest, to build, to create jobs. But I cannot build in a war zone. I cannot put good men to work if they fear for their families' lives. He paused, letting them absorb the threat. No jobs, no security. Therefore, Hale continued, I am accelerating my plans. My operation requires security. I am expanding my ranch, and effective immediately. I will be fencing the land adjacent to the Redwater Valley. It is a necessary measure to protect my herds, and to provide a secure buffer between this town and the hostiles. Svensson, the homesteader, looked alarmed. But Mr. Hale, our claims, the water. Your claims will be respected, sir, if they are proven valid by the new survey, Hale said, his voice hardening just a fraction. My fences will secure the area. Sheriff Boyd will be hiring deputies, funded by my company, to ensure the work proceeds without incident. We must bring civilization to this valley, gentlemen. We cannot allow savages to dictate our future. The men in the saloon, moments before a nervous crowd, now felt a surge of purpose. They were not just drinkers, they were defenders. Hale had given their fear a name, and he had given their anger a job. Riker smiled into his whiskey. The valley was theirs. Evelyn Carter heard the noise of the saloon before she saw it. It was the sound of a hornet's nest kicked. She rode her mare down the alley, avoiding the main street, her body screaming with every step the horse took. Her leg was a pillar of fire, stiff and swollen. It had taken her half an hour to saddle the horse, a task she usually did in 5 minutes, and the ride to town had been agony. She knew Riker's threat was real. Tonight, Copper Crossing. He knew she had the papers. He would tear her sod house apart, but she also knew he had failed. He did not have the satchel. She had gambled. She had gambled that the Comanche scout, the man who saved her and yet looked at her with such contempt, was a man of the land, and a man of the land needed the livery. She dismounted in the dark alley behind the stables, biting her lip so hard she tasted blood as her weight landed on her injured leg. She paid the stable boy, a quiet youth, a nickel to rub down her mare, and then she slipped inside the vast, dark barn. It was quiet. The air was thick with the smells she loved: dry hay, oats, horse sweat, and the faint, sharp tang of ammonia. Dust motes danced in the few shafts of moonlight slanting through the high windows. The horses in their stalls shifted, blowing softly, their presence a comfort. "You came," she said, her voice a low tremor. He stepped out of the shadow of a hayrick. Tahan. He was not the savior from the gully. His face was hard, carved from stone in the lantern light. He held her leather satchel in his hand. "You lied," he said. His voice was not loud, but it filled the space. "I had to," she whispered, leaning against a post for support. "Riker, you heard him. They would have found it." "You put this on my horse," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You made me a target. You made me a thief." "You were already a target," she countered, her own anger rising through the pain. "The moment you stood between us. What did you think? That they would thank you?" He looked at the satchel, then at her. "I read it." Her breath caught. The anger and the fear vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. You read my notes." "The map," he clarified. "The red lines, the water. He steals the red water." The tension broke, replaced by something new. They were not accuser and accused. They were two people staring at the same axe. "Yes," she said, her voice heavy. "He steals it from your people. He steals it from the homesteaders. He stole it from my father. I think he murdered my father to get this started." Tahan watched her, his gaze unwavering. He had seen this story before. He had seen the way white men ate their own. He believed her. "Why did you come back?" she asked, her voice softer. "You had the papers. You could have—" "This is my land," he said, the words simple, absolute. "He will not have it." "Then we have to stop him. Reich is in the saloon right now, telling everyone the Comanche attacked the stage. They are calling you hostiles." Tahan's face tightened. "They lie to move faster." "It worked," she said bitterly. "Jasper Hale just announced he is fencing the valley, a protective expansion. He has Boyd. He has the guns. They will start tomorrow." Tahan looked down at the satchel. "They have a false map." He looked up at her. "We have the true one. The land itself. The old markers. The stones the first surveyors left." Evelyn's mind raced, pushing past her pain. He was right. "We have to check the markers. We have to prove the survey is false." "I will go," Tahan said. "No," she said, surprising herself with the force of her own voice. "I will go with you. Your word against theirs is nothing in this town. But my word, with proof, is different. I have the original survey notes in that bag. I have my camera." He looked at her leg, at the dark stain on her canvas trousers. "You are hurt." "It is just a leg," she said, dismissing it. "We need proof they cannot burn. We need to document every marker, every stone, before they move them." He gave her a long, appraising look. She did not waver. He gave a short, sharp nod. It was not friendship. It was a truce, an alliance born of necessity. As Tahan turned to saddle his Mustang, the high, frantic clicking of the telegraph key suddenly cut through the night. It came from the office down the street, fast and urgent. Tahan paused, his hand on his saddle. "The talking wire. It speaks late tonight." In the telegraph office, Mrs. Finch, a small, stern woman in a gray dress, transcribed the message as it came. Sheriff Boyd stood behind her, his cigarillo fouling the air. The message was coded, but he had the key. Mrs. Finch wrote, "Hale, Boyd, move fast. Approval granted. Clear red water before big rain. Commissioner arrives after storm. End." Boyd smiled. A slow, ugly expression. "Before the big rain. It seems we have a deadline. Mrs. Finch, send a reply. Work commencing at sunrise." "Mrs." Finch looked out the window. The air was still, too still. The sky to the west was not black, but a strange, bruised purple, like an old wound. Back in the livery, the wind began to moan. It was not the usual prairie wind. It was a deep, guttural sound that rattled the big doors. The horses in the stalls grew restless, stamping, blowing air through their nostrils. Tahan stopped, lifting his head. He looked up at the rafters. The barn swallows, usually settled by this hour, were dipping and weaving in panicked circles, flying low, refusing to land. "A storm," Evelyn said, pulling the cinch tight on her mare. "A dust storm," Tahan corrected her. His voice was grim. "A big one. It will be here by morning. It will cover the sky. Then they will not be able to work." She said, "No," he said, turning to her. "It means they will not be seen. We have to ride faster." Before they left, Tahan stopped. He had returned to the valley for less than an hour, only to tell the elders what he had found. He had told Quanah, the old leader whose face was a map of the plains, about the red lines on the white woman's paper. Quanah had simply nodded, his eyes closed. "The railroad is not just iron," the old man had said, his voice like dry leaves. "It is the bones of a snake, buried in the earth to poison the water. You cannot stop the snake. Tahan, you can only protect the people." Now, Tahan reached inside his shirt. He pulled out a small, worn buckskin pouch. He did not open it. He did not need to. He knew what was inside. A single feather from a golden eagle. It had been his mother's. It was not a charm for war. It was a reminder of balance, a reminder of his duty. He was a scout. He was a protector. He was Comanche. He tied the pouch back around his neck, the leather warm against his skin. He had his honor. He turned to Evelyn. He held her satchel. "You will carry this?" He led his Mustang into the alley. Evelyn, her face pale with pain, followed, pulling her mare. They moved as two shadows, away from the light and the noise of the saloons, away from the frantic, clicking wire. They slipped out of Copper Crossing, two lonely riders against the vast, bruised sky, the rising wind at their backs, pushing them toward the red water. The wind was a living thing at their backs. It was not the gentle prairie breeze. It was a physical push, cold and smelling of grit, a high, lonesome whine that promised a scouring. They rode hard, leaning into their horses, pushing away from Copper Crossing and toward the dark line of hills that guarded the Redwater Valley. The sky was no longer black, but a deep, sickly yellow, the color of old bruises. Tahan rode in the lead, his body a part of the horse, his gaze sweeping the horizon. He was taking them on a line that was not a trail, cutting across the open land to save time, his knowledge of the terrain absolute. Evelyn followed, the pain in her leg a dull, constant fire. She clenched her teeth with every jarring step of the mare, her hands tight on the reins, the heavy satchel. Now her responsibility was tied to her own saddle, its weight a comfort and a terror. They did not speak for the first hour. There was no breath to spare. The wind stole the words. Tahan finally slowed, pulling his Mustang behind a swell of land, a shallow dip that offered a moment's rest from the gale. The horses stood, heads down, flanks heaving. "We checked the southern marker first," Tahan said, his voice loud against the wind. "It is the one the engineer was nearest to." "How do you know where it is?" Evelyn shouted back. He did not point to a map. He pointed to his head. "I know the star that rises over it in winter. I know the shadow it casts at midday. I know the stone." Evelyn pulled her compass from a pocket, the brass case cold in her hand. "My father's notes say it is 3 miles east of the dry creek bed, aligned with the Wolf Butte." Tahan nodded. "The creek bed, yes, but the stone is not where your father saw it." They rode on, the world growing stranger, the light fading not to darkness, but to a murky, oppressive twilight. The sun was a pale wafer, suffocated by the high, fast-moving dust. Tahan stopped, dismounting. "Here." Evelyn looked around. There was nothing, just empty grass, whipped flat by the wind. "Here the notes say it should be on the rise." Tahan walked 20 paces. He knelt, pulling his knife. He began to dig at the sod, cutting a neat square. The earth was dry, hard as iron. He worked, the muscles in his back and shoulders moving with efficient power. After a few minutes, his knife struck something. He cleared the dirt. It was a stone, not a native rock, but a granite marker, cut square, its top chiseled with the X of the survey. It was buried 6 inches beneath the prairie. "They buried it," Evelyn whispered, sliding from her horse. She limped over, her heart pounding. "They did not want it found." Tahan said, "They want the new one found." He stood and pointed northwest, toward a rise a quarter of a mile away. "That is where they will put the new marker, on the hill, where your father's notes say it should be. But they have moved the hill." Moved the hill. "They have shifted the line," he said. "They are stealing all the land between here." He tapped the buried stone with his boot. "And there, it is a strip a quarter mile wide and 10 miles long. It is how they move the railroad's claim. It is how they take the water." Evelyn understood. The theft was not subtle. It was vast. She pulled out her notebook and her pencil, her fingers numb with cold. She knelt by the half-buried stone. "We need to document this, the alignment." She took out the compass. "It is aligned with the Wolf Butte, just as my father's notes say. This is the original." "Now the other one," Tahan said, his eyes on the horizon. The wind was getting worse. They rode to the rise. The new marker was plain to see, a fresh pile of rocks around a newly set granite stone. its chiseled X sharp and white. It was a lie, sitting brazenly in the open. Evelyn worked quickly. She measured the angles with her compass. She noted the lack of weathering on the stone. She noted the fresh digging. "It is wrong," she said, scribbling. "The alignment is off by 2 degrees. It points away from the butte. It points toward Hale's land." "Now the pictures," Tahan said, his voice urgent, "before the sky closes." This was the hard part. Evelyn opened her saddlebag and pulled out the small, boxy camera and the case of chemicals. The collodion process was a wet plate process. It required her to pour the chemical syrup onto a glass plate, dip it in a silver nitrate bath, and expose the plate while it was still wet. All in the open. All in a howling, dust-filled wind. "I need shelter," she said, her teeth chattering. Tahan looked around. There was none. He dismounted, pulling the heavy buffalo robe from his bedroll. "Here." He held the thick cured hide up, turning his back to the wind, creating a small, flapping tent. "Be fast." Evelyn knelt behind him, shielded. Her hands shook. She fumbled with the glass plates. The first one. She coated it. But the wind ripped the hide from Tahan's grasp for a second. A sheet of fine grit blew over her, ruining the plate. "Again," he said, his voice calm, resetting his stance, his feet planted wide, his shoulders taking the full force of the gale. She tried again. She poured the collodion. It flowed unevenly. She dipped it in the silver. She ran to the tripod, her legs screaming in protest. She put the plate holder in, pulled the dark slide. 10 seconds, she counted, her voice lost in the whine of the wind. She put the slide back, ran to her chemical box. She poured the developer. It was a failure. The image was a blur, a fog of dust and chemical stains. "I cannot do it," she cried, frustration and pain welling up. "The wind, the dust, it is impossible." Tahan turned. He looked at her, his face grim. Then he looked at the sky. The yellow light was turning a deep, angry orange. The clouds of dust were no longer on the horizon. They were upon them. "You will do it," he said. It was not a request. He pulled his Mustang and her mare closer, lining them up side by side. He took the blanket from her mare and his own. He draped them over the horses, creating a low, narrow space between the animals. "Get under," he commanded, "between them. They will block the wind." Evelyn scrambled into the dark, warm space. It smelled of horse and leather. It was almost still. Tahan hunkered down at the opening, his body in the buffalo robe acting as a final door. "Now," he said. In the cramped, dark stable of horseflesh, Evelyn prepared a third plate. Her hands were steadier. She coated it. She sensitized it. She crawled out, set the camera on the low tripod, aimed at the false marker. She made the exposure. She crawled back under the horses and developed the plate. A clear, sharp negative began to appear. The white stone, the piled rocks, the empty, wind-swept grass. It was bleak, but it was clear. "I have it," she breathed, relief washing over her. She fixed the plate in the chemical bath, her heart hammering. "Good," Tahan said, standing, already pulling the blankets from the horses. "We move. We are too exposed." They rode into the growing storm, the dust becoming so thick it was hard to breathe. It was like riding through a cloud of fine, sharp sand. It stung their eyes, their faces. They covered their mouths with bandanas. They found the creek bed of the Redwater, a shallow, winding depression lined with a few thirsty cottonwoods. The trees were a blessing, offering a slight break from the wind, but the channel itself was just cracked mud. "The water is low," Evelyn said, her voice muffled. "It is low here," Tahan said. "Upstream, where the valley widens, it runs clear. That is where my people are. That is where Hale wants his fence." They followed the creek bed, the banks offering some cover. As the orange gloom deepened, Tahan spotted a flicker of light through the haze. It was a lantern, hanging on a post. He dismounted, motioning for her to stay. He moved forward on foot, vanishing into the brown clouds. He was gone for 5 minutes. Then he reappeared. "Homesteaders," he said, "their barn is gone." He led her toward the light. It was a small sod house, dug into the side of a small hill, much like her own. But where a barn should have been, there was only a pile of charred, smoking timbers. The wind was whipping the embers, sending small sparks into the dusty air. A man came out of the sod house, carrying a rifle. He was lean, his face weathered, his eyes suspicious. He was Mexican, or perhaps part Apache. "Who is there?" he called out, his voice rough. "We are travelers," Tahan called back, his hands raised, away from his weapons. "Caught in the storm. We mean no harm." A woman appeared in the doorway behind the man, pulling a small girl close to her. "Manuel, let them come in. The sky is falling." The man, Manuel Torres, hesitated, then nodded, lowering the rifle. "Come, before the wind takes you." They hurried the horses into the small lee of the house, where a few goats huddled miserably. Tahan and Evelyn ducked inside the soddy. It was one room, cramped and poor, but it was warm, and the light from the lantern was steady. It smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and fear. "We are grateful," Evelyn said, pulling the bandana from her face, her hair, her clothes. Her skin were coated in a fine layer of dust. The woman, Maria Torres, gave her a tired smile. "We have coffee." She looked at Tahan, her dark eyes showing recognition. "You are from the valley, one of Quana's people." Tahan nodded. "I am Tahan." Manuel Torres bolted the door. The sound of the wind became a low, deep roar outside. "I am Manuel. This is my wife, Maria, and our daughter, Luz." The little girl, Luz, peeked out from behind her mother. She was perhaps 6 years old. "Your barn," Evelyn said, gesturing to the door. Manuel's face darkened. "It was not the wind. It was last night. 3 men. They rode out from town." "Why?" Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. "The same reason," Maria said, her voice bitter. She handed Evelyn a tin cup of coffee. "They want the land. They said Mr. Hale made an offer. We said no, this is our land. We have the paper. We proved it up. They said our paper was no good. They said, get out or be burned out." "They burned our hay," Manuel said, his voice cracking. "They burned the tools. They scattered the stock. We have nothing left, only the goats." Luz, the little girl, came forward. She was holding her hand. "The fire bit me," she whispered. Evelyn knelt, wincing as her own leg protested. "Let me see. Sweet one." The girl's hand was red, a nasty burn across her palm where she had likely grabbed a hot piece of wood. "Tahan," Evelyn said, "my satchel, the medical kit." Tahan, who had been standing by the door, a silent sentinel, brought the bag. Evelyn dug out her small roll of bandages, a tin of salve, and a bottle of carbolic. She cleaned the girl's hand gently, her movements practiced and sure. Luz watched her, her dark eyes wide, but she did not cry. "You are brave," Evelyn murmured, wrapping the hand in a clean white bandage. As she worked, Tahan unslung his pack. He took out a leather bag of jerky, dried buffalo meat, and a small sack of parched corn. He placed it on the family's small table. "It is not much," he said to Manuel, "but it is food." Manuel looked at the food, then at Tahan. He had been taught to fear the Comanche, to see them as rivals for the land. But this man, this hostile from the town's rumors, was sharing his food, while the white men from town had brought fire. "Gracias," Manuel said, his voice thick. They sat in the small sod house, the storm screaming outside, a fragile peace settling within. They were 4 adults and 1 child, from 3 different worlds, all in the shadow of the same enemy. They ate the jerky and drank the bitter coffee. The hours passed. The storm did not lessen. "They will not stop with me," Manuel said, staring into the lantern flame. "They will burn out Svensson. They will burn you out." He looked at Evelyn. "They already tried," Evelyn said quietly. "They attacked the stage. They killed the driver." Tahan spoke, his voice low, telling them about the map, about the plan to steal the red water. "They steal the water. They kill us all," Maria said, her voice flat. "Without the creek, this land is a desert." Later, as the child slept, the conversation turned personal. It was the way of people trapped in a storm, their outer defenses worn away by the wind. "You are a healer," Maria said to Evelyn. "I'm trying to be," Evelyn said. "My father, he wanted me to be a lady, but I always preferred his medical books." "Your father," Manuel said. "He was the accident." Evelyn nodded, her throat tightening. "They called it an accident. He fell from his horse, but he was fighting hail over these same boundaries. He had his own notes, I think. I am sure Riker arranged it." There was a silence. Tahan spoke into it, his voice distant, as if speaking to the storm itself. "My younger brother," he said. "His name was Little Hawk. He was 9 winters. I was scouting for the army. I thought I was doing good. I was paid. I was learning the white man's ways. I was showing them I was not a savage." He paused, his jaw tight. "A wagon train I was guiding had the sickness, the cholera. It moved like a fast, hot wind. They blamed us, the scouts, said we brought it from the river, but it was in their own water barrels. My brother, he was with me. He liked the soldiers. He liked the sugar candy they gave him. He died in 2 days. He died in my arms." Tahan looked at his hands, as if seeing the memory there. "I learned their ways, and all I learned was how to watch my own blood die from their diseases. I left. I never went back." Evelyn looked at him, seeing for the first time the man behind the stone mask. She saw the shared landscape of their grief, a father murdered by greed, a brother killed by ignorance. They were not so different. The storm raged all night. By morning, it was impossible to see the hand in front of your face. They were trapped. They spent the day resting, reinforcing the door, sharing their meager supplies. On the second morning, the wind had dropped. It was still, the air thick and brown, the silence deafening. Tahan opened the door. The world was gone. It was buried. The landscape was a new, strange place. Drifts of fine dust piled like snow, smoothing the edges of the hills, filling the arroyos. The sun was a dull red coin in a brown sky. "They will be moving," Tahan said, his voice muffled by the thick air. "They will use this cover." "We have to move, too," Evelyn said. She stood, testing her leg. It was stiff, but the rest had helped. They said their goodbyes to the Torres family. Maria pressed a small, woven cross into Evelyn's hand. "Vaya con Dios." "We will be back," Evelyn promised, "and we will fight this." They rode out into the transformed world. The air was gritty, hard to breathe. Finding the trail was impossible, but Tahan did not need a trail. He read the new, soft drifts, the angle of the hidden sun. They rode for an hour, when Tahan suddenly reined in, his head cocked. "What is it?" Evelyn whispered. "Horses, up ahead." He slipped off his Mustang, motioning for her to dismount. They led the horses into a deep drift, a new gully carved by the wind. "Stay here. Stay quiet." He scrambled up the side of the drift, moving on his belly, and peered over the top. It was Riker and 4 other men. They were not riding. They were working. They were setting a new line of fence posts. pounding them deep into the soft, dusty earth. They were moving fast, taking advantage of the gloom, fencing the valley, sealing it off. Tahan slid back down. "Riker, 5 men. They are fencing the north meadow." "We have to go around them," Evelyn said. "No, we go through." He pointed west, toward a narrow, rocky canyon. "The cut, it is faster. It will bring us out above them." It was a dangerous choice. The canyon was narrow, its footing treacherous, and now it would be filled with unknown drifts of sand. "We cannot fight 5 men," Evelyn said. "We will not fight," Tahan said. "We will be wind." They rode toward the canyon. The entrance was choked with dust. As they pushed through, they heard a shout from behind. One of Riker's men, riding patrol, had seen them. "Riker, over here, it's the Comanche and the woman." Gunshots echoed, flat and dead in the thick air. "Ride," Tahan yelled. They spurred their horses, plunging into the narrow canyon. It was a dark, twisting passage. Rocks loomed out of the brown haze. Behind them, they heard the hoofbeats of Riker's men, amplified by the stone walls. "They are coming!" Evelyn cried. Tahan looked up. The walls of the canyon were steep. He saw a game trail, a narrow shelf of rock. He looked ahead. The canyon was blocked by a drift. They were trapped. Then he heard it, a faint sound, a rumbling. It was not Riker. It was coming from the shelf above. He reined in so hard his horse reared. "Get back against the wall!" He grabbed her mare's reins, forcing both horses flat against the rock. A moment later, a dark shape hurtled past them in the gloom. A wild horse, eyes wide, fleeing the storm. And then another, and another. A herd of mustangs, using the game trail to escape the open plains, was pouring into the canyon. "Riker," Tahan yelled, a savage joy in his voice. Riker and his men galloped around the bend, riding blind into the haze. They rode directly into the path of the stampeding mustangs. It was chaos. Horses screamed, men shouted. The narrow canyon was a whirl of panicked animals, white men and wild horses colliding in the thick, brown dust. Tahan did not wait. He grabbed Evelyn's rein. "Now!" He spurred his horse, not back, but forward, picking his way through the edge of the chaos, past the drift, and into the open canyon beyond. They burst out of the canyon's mouth, back into the dim, open valley. They were clear. Behind them, the sounds of the disaster faded. Evelyn was laughing, a breathless, half-hysterical sound. "You did that." "The land did that," Tahan said, but he was smiling, a rare, fierce expression. Then the smile vanished. He was looking at her side. "You are hurt," he said. Evelyn looked down. Her side was wet. It was not blood, but her jacket was torn. A long, ragged rip along her ribs, a ricochet, or a piece of flying rock from the canyon, had grazed her. It was shallow, a long, painful scrape, but it had torn her open. She swayed in the saddle, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a sudden, sickening wave of pain. "I am all right," she said, but the words were weak. Tahan was beside her in an instant. He did not ask permission. He put his arm around her waist, a grip of iron, and lifted her bodily from her saddle onto his own. He sat her in front of him, her back against his chest, holding her secure with one arm, his other hand taking the reins of both horses. "Hold on," he said, his voice rough. She leaned back against him, her head spinning. She could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart through his leather shirt. She could feel the strength in the arm that held her. It was not gentle. It was possessive. It was the grip of a man who would not let her fall. The wind howled around them, but for the first time in days, Evelyn felt a strange, impossible flicker of safety. The spark had been struck. He rode with her pressed tight against him, her weight light in his arms, her back against the solid wall of his chest. The world was a brown, Howling hell. A nightmare of grit and noise. He could not ride to the main camp at Redwater. It was too exposed. He could not bring the white man's violence, and the warrant that would surely follow. To the women and children. He needed a place of shadows, a place the storm would hide. He turned the Mustang west, cutting away from the valley, toward the deep canyons, toward the small, hidden lodge of his friend, Atsa. Atsa was a man who lived apart, a man who smoked deer meat for the tribe and listened to the wind. He would be there. They rode for what felt like hours, the Mustang and the mare moving as one, heads down, enduring the punishment of the wind. Evelyn had passed beyond pain into a dull, throbbing exhaustion. She was barely conscious when Tahan finally slowed the horse. Atsa's lodge was built into the side of a canyon, a dugout fronted by a heavy smokehouse made of river stone and thick sod. It was nearly invisible in the brown haze. Atsa was there, as Tahan knew he would be. He was a man as weathered as the stone, his face a web of deep lines. He greeted Tahan with a single, sharp nod, his eyes taking in the woman without surprise or question. He simply opened the heavy wooden door. Tahan carried her inside. The lodge was one large room, dark, lit only by a low fire in a central pit. It smelled of hickory smoke, curing leather, and safety. He laid her gently on a pile of thick buffalo robes, away from the fire. Atsa handed him a water skin, then turned back to the door, securing it against the storm with a heavy wooden bar. The roar of the wind dropped to a distant, angry moan. "Your side," Tahan said. It was not a question. "It is just a scrape," she said, her voice thin. She tried to sit up, but her muscles screamed. He ignored her protest. He took a clean rag from his own pack and dipped it in the water. "This will sting." He did not wait for her permission. He pushed aside the torn, stiff canvas of her jacket and the damp shirt beneath. The scrape was long and ugly, running along her ribs, raw and filled with grit. She hissed, clenching her teeth, but she did not cry out. He worked with a focus that was impersonal, yet deeply careful. His fingers were rough, calloused from reins and rope, but his touch was steady. She was intensely, painfully aware of his proximity, of his hand on her skin, of the small, controlled motions as he cleaned the wound. The sting was sharp, but it was the heat of his hand that made her shiver. He finished, then rose and went to Atsa. They spoke for a moment in the Comanche tongue, too low for her to hear. Atsa nodded and produced a small pouch. Tahan returned, kneeling beside her again. He took out a pinch of dried yarrow and moss and applied it to the wound. "It will stop the bleeding and keep the sickness out," he said, his voice rough. He pulled her torn shirt back over the bandage, his movements efficient, final. He said nothing more, but the act hung in the smoky air between them. Evelyn lay on the robes, the warmth of the fire slowly seeping into her bones. She watched the two men. They sat by the fire, sharing a pipe, speaking in their low, guttural language. They were men of the earth, comfortable in the darkness, at home in the storm. She was the outsider, the intruder, the wounded. She must have slept. When she woke, the fire was lower, and Tahan was sitting alone, sharpening his knife by the low light. The storm still raged outside. Evelyn sat up, her side pulling, but the sharp agony was gone. Her eyes were adjusting to the gloom. She looked around the lodge. It was a smokehouse, racks of drying meat hanging from the rafters. It was dark, the only light from the fire pit and a few cracks in the roof, sealed against the storm. "This place," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. Tahan looked up, his hand stopping its rhythmic work on the stone. "It is safe. Atsa is hunting the canyon. He will find what is left of Riker's men." "No," she said, her mind clicking back into place. "This place, it is dark. There are no windows. It is perfect." He looked at her, confused. "For what?" "It is a dark room," she said, a new energy in her voice. She pulled her heavy satchel close. I have to develop the plates, now, before the images fade. She needed water. She needed her chemicals. She needed darkness. Tahan watched, his suspicion warring with curiosity. As she began to unpack her strange glass bottles and her tin chemical box, she motioned to the fire. We need less light, just the smallest ember. Tahan covered the fire pit with a flat stone, plunging the lodge into near total darkness, lit only by the tiny red lantern Evelyn produced from her kit. In the dim, eerie light, she began her work. Her hands were sure again, moving in the familiar, precise ritual of the chemicals. Tahan watched in silence as she poured the collodion over the glass plate, the syrup catching the red light. She dipped it, her hands steady, and began to work with the developer. An image began to emerge from the milky film. It was faint, then stronger, a ghost in the glass. It was the false marker, the white stone, the piled rocks, the bleak, empty land. It was sharp, clearer than she could have hoped. I have it, she breathed, relief so profound it was almost a sob. The proof. It is real. Tahan leaned closer, his face illuminated by the red lantern. What is that? He asked, his voice low. He pointed to a small, dark smudge on the side of the stone, captured perfectly by the lens. A shadow, a mark on the rock. Evelyn held the plate closer, her eyes narrowing, her breath caught in her throat. No, she whispered, her voice electric with discovery. That is not a shadow. That is a fingerprint. She looked up at him, her eyes wide in the dark. The engineer, he must have gripped the stone to steady it when they set it. The wet collodion, the light. It captured it. He was careless. Tahan, this is better than a photograph. It is a signature. Atsa returned as she was fixing the plate, the image now permanent. He entered like a shadow, bringing a blast of cold, gritty air. He stood by the door, letting his eyes adjust. The picture is strong, he said, looking at the glass plate she held. He had seen the white man's magic before. But the town is poisoned. Tahan looked at him. You were there. I was, Atsa said. He dropped a heavy canvas belt on the floor. It was the gun belt of one of Riker's men. I found one. He did not survive the canyon. The others rode back. Riker is alive. He is telling a new story. What story? Evelyn asked, a cold dread creeping back. The story they tell, Atsa said, looking at Tahan, is that you attacked the stage, that you murdered Silas, that you kidnapped this woman. Sheriff Boyd has signed the paper. There is a warrant for your arrest. Tahan, for murder, for kidnapping. They will hang you if they catch you. Evelyn looked up, horrified. They are blaming him. But that is a lie. I am the witness. I can tell them. Can you? Tahan said, his voice flat, devoid of hope. You are a woman. I am Comanche. Who will they believe? Evelyn was furious, her fear turning to iron. This is why we must act. We have the photograph. We have the fingerprint. This proves the survey is false. We have to get this to the telegraph office. We have to send it to the Sentinel. Mrs. Finch will help me. No, Tahan said, his voice absolute. He stood up, pacing the small, dark room like a caged animal. It is not enough. You are a white woman. They will say I am holding you. They will say I forced you to take the picture. They will say the fingerprint is mine. Boyd will take the glass plate and break it on the street. And that will be the end of it. Then what? She demanded, her voice cracking. What is more proof than this? What else can we do? Their own words, Tahan said. He stopped pacing. The talking wire, the telegrams you copied, they are in code. This picture is what we see. We need what they said. We need the key to their words. We need the proof that connects Hale and Boyd and the engineer. Evelyn stared at him, the pieces clicking into place. The code book, the railroad code book. The engineer, Tahan said. The man who left his print on the stone. He would have the code book. He is at the survey camp. We cannot go there, she said. The storm. The storm is our cover. Tahan said, Atsa, where is the camp? A league south, Atsa said. Huddled by the creek. They are afraid of the wind. We go now, Tahan said. The survey camp was a collection of canvas tents, straining against the wind. A few lanterns casting pathetic yellow circles in the brown gloom. The dust storm was their only ally. A thick curtain that muffled their approach and blinded the single, miserable guard who huddled by a smoking fire. Tahan told Evelyn to wait with the horses in a deep arroyo, hidden from the camp. I am going with you, she said. No, you are hurt. You are loud. You will wait. If I am not back by the time the moon should be highest, ride east. Go to the Torres family. Do not stop. Tahan, I am not leaving you. You will, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. And then he was gone. He did not run. He simply vanished into the brown, swirling haze. Evelyn waited. It was the longest hour of her life. She sat, her leg throbbing, her side aching, holding the reins of both horses. The wind shrieked, a high, thin sound that frayed her nerves. Every shadow, every gust of wind was Riker. She heard a muffled shout from the camp. A dog barked, a panicked, cut-off sound. Silence. Her heart was in her throat. She gathered the reins, her hand shaking, preparing to ride. She was reaching for her rifle when he reappeared. He did not emerge from the haze. He simply was there, next to her, his breathing not even labored. He was holding a small, leather-bound ledger. You have it, she breathed. He was not smart, Tahan said, his voice tight. He kept it under his pillow. He swung onto his Mustang, his movements urgent. We cannot go back to Atsa's. They will know they were robbed. They will look for tracks when the wind dies. Where do we go? She yelled over the wind. The high caves, to the west. They rode, not back the way they came, but deeper into the wilderness, pushing into the teeth of the storm. The wind had returned, not as a gale, but as a physical, suffocating force. The world went from brown to black. Dust turned to sharp, stinging sand, finding its way into their mouths, their eyes. The horses stopped, refusing to walk into the black wall of grit. We cannot stay here, Evelyn yelled, terror rising. We will be buried. Tahan dismounted, pulling her down from the mare. We do not ride, we walk, led the horses. They stumbled forward, blind, pulling the terrified animals, the air so thick they could barely breathe. The ground beneath their feet changed. It became rocky, rising. Tahan stopped, his head up, feeling the air. What is it? A hollow, he said. He felt his way along a low cliff face, his hands reading the stone. Here, a cave. It was barely a hole, a fissure in the limestone. It was not a home. It was a tomb, but it was shelter. They pushed the horses into the small lee of the rock face, where they huddled. And then Tahan and Evelyn crawled inside, pulling their saddlebags. The cave was not deep, perhaps 20 feet. It was absolute, suffocating darkness. The only sound was the high, screaming roar of the storm outside. They sat in the pitch black for hours. The sound of the wind was a monster trying to get in. Evelyn shivered. Though the air was not cold, it was the shock, the wound, the bone-deep exhaustion. Tahan, sitting opposite her, was just a presence in the dark. She heard him unstop his water skin. The small sound was intimate in the roaring silence. Here, he said. His hand found hers in the blackness, pushing the skin into it. She drank. The water was warm, metallic, and the most precious thing she had ever tasted. She drank only 2 swallows, then handed it back. You drink. His fingers brushed hers as he took it, a simple, accidental touch. But in the dark, with the world ending outside, it felt like an anchor. "My side hurts," she whispered, not complaining, just stating a fact. The crawl had opened the wound. "The bandage is loose." "Stay still," he commanded. She could not see him, but she felt him shift closer. The cave was small, their knees almost touching. She felt his hands, sure and steady, find the bandage on her ribs. He worked by feel, adjusting the poultice, retying the knot, his knuckles brushing her skin. It was a clinical, necessary act, but her breath caught in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat in silence for a long time. "We are trapped," she said, her voice small. "He will win. Hale will have the valley fenced before this storm even breaks." "The storm stops," Tahan said, his voice calm in the roaring dark. "The land rests, then we move." "You are so calm," she said, a new note of wonder in her voice. "Does this not frighten you?" "It is wind," he said. "It is not a lie. It is not a map that steals. It is not a man with a badge who serves a thief. It is just wind. I understand the wind." "I do not understand it," she said, her voice small. "I understand paper. I understand truth. The one thing my father taught me. He said that the truth, written down, is the only thing that lasts, the only thing that sets anyone free." "Freedom," Tahan said. The word sounded strange, bitter. "Your freedom is paper. Your truth is ink on a page." "And yours?" she asked. "My freedom," he said, and she could almost hear the shape of him in the dark, looking out at a horizon he could not see. "Is the horizon. It is the right to move. It is the right to follow the buffalo. It is the right for the water to run where it was meant to run. Your paper cannot stop a fence. Your ink cannot feed my people." "But your horizon cannot stop a crooked survey," she countered, her voice gaining strength. "Your freedom to move ends where their fence begins. That is why we need both, your horizon and my truth on paper." He was silent for a long time. The only sound was the screaming wind and the slow, faint drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the back of the cave. He shifted, his shoulder brushing hers in the dark. "You are right," he said, the admission quiet, costing him. "The old ways are not enough. The new ways are not enough. We need both." Evelyn felt a profound shift in the darkness. A wall she did not even know was there turning to dust. He was not just an ally of circumstance. He was a partner. In the darkness, she reached out, her hand finding his. His hand was rough, calloused, and unbelievably strong. He did not pull away. His fingers closed around hers. A simple, powerful grip. "We will not let them win. Tahan," she whispered. "I will not abandon you in this." His grip tightened, his thumb moving once over her knuckles. "And I," he said, his voice a low promise in the dark, "will not abandon you." They slept, finally, exhausted, huddled separately but joined by that promise. When Evelyn woke, the cave was gray, not black. The screaming had stopped. The silence was so complete. It was what woke her. Tahan was already at the mouth of the cave, a black silhouette against a pale, washed-out sky. "It is over," she said, limping to his side. "It has stopped," he corrected. He was not looking at the sky. He was looking intently at something in the distance. She stepped out into the new world. The air was clean, sharp, and cold. The land was scrubbed bare, the dust settled by a light rain that must have come at the very end of the storm. The world looked clean, reborn. And in the distance, on the western ridge, was a long, dark line. "Buffalo," she breathed. It was a massive herd, thousands of them, a river of dark fur. "They are going the wrong way," Tahan said, his voice hard and cold. "What?" "They are moving west," he said, pointing. Away from the valley. Away from the red water. They should be moving to the water. Why? She asked, a new fear rising. Because the water is gone, he said. He pointed down into the valley, and in the new, clean light, she could see it, miles upstream, where the red water should be a shining ribbon. There was a raw scar of earth and rock, a dam, a blockage. He did not wait, Tahan said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. While we hid from the wind, hail stole the river. The ride back to Copper Crossing was a silent, furious race against time. The sight of Hale's raw, earthen dam, the death of the red water, had burned away their caution. It was no longer a fight for land. It was a fight for the lifeblood of the valley. The clean, rain-scrubbed air felt like a mockery. They skirted the edge of town, avoiding the main street, where the first signs of morning activity were beginning. Tahan led the horses into the same alley behind the livery, his movements tense. The town felt different. The air was not just cold, it was hostile. You wait with the horses, Evelyn said, sliding from her mare, her body stiff with pain. No, Tahan said, dismounting. We go together. They will arrest you on sight. Tahan, the warrant. They will arrest me, he said, his face grim. But you will not go in alone. That office is the center of the trap. Mrs. Finch is not part of it, Evelyn insisted. She is a good woman. She is the only one who can help us. Then we will see how good, Tahan said. He unslung the satchel, his hand resting on the leather-bound code book. He held the glass plate negative, wrapped in its protective cloth. The truth, and the key. They moved from the alley, staying in the shadows, and slipped through the back door of the post and telegraph office. The room was quiet, smelling of ink, dust, and the faint ozone of the telegraph key. Mrs. Finch was at her desk, sorting the morning's mail. She was a woman in her 50s, small and sharp as a pin, her gray hair pulled into a severe bun. She looked up, and her eyes, behind small spectacles, widened in surprise, then narrowed in alarm. Miss Carter, you are supposed to be kidnapped. I was not, Evelyn said, her voice low and urgent. She bolted the back door. Mrs. Finch, we have no time. We have proof that Sheriff Boyd and Jasper Hale are thieves. She laid the glass plate on the counter. This is a photograph of the false survey marker. Riker's men said it. It has the railroad engineer's fingerprint on it. Mrs. Finch leaned closer, her sharp eyes examining the plate. A fingerprint. Goodness. And this, Evelyn said, placing the codebook beside it, is the railroad's telegraph ledger. Tahan took it from the survey camp. It contains the real messages, the orders to steal the land. Mrs. Finch looked from the book to Tahan, who stood by the door, a silent, watchful shadow. Her face was pale, but set. I have wondered, she said, her voice dry. The messages Boyd has had me send, securing assets, managing tribal complaints. I knew it was wrong. We need you to send a new message, Evelyn said, her words tumbling out, to the Sentinel in Philadelphia, to the Land Commissioner in Omaha. We will tell them everything, the false map, the warrant, the dam. They have dammed the red water. They what, Mrs.? Finch whispered, her hand flying to her throat. The whole valley. The front door of the office exploded open, the lock splintering. Sheriff Boyd filled the doorway, his face mottled with rage. Behind him stood Riker, his arm in a sling, his eyes burning with a feverish hatred. There, Riker bellowed, pointing at Tahan. The murderer, he has got her. He forced her here. Boyd advanced into the room, his pistol in his hand. Tahan, you are under arrest for murder, kidnapping, and attacking the stage. It is the rope for you, boy. He did not kidnap me, Evelyn shouted, moving between Boyd and Tahan. He saved me. Riker is the one who attacked the stage. His men killed Silas. He is the murderer. She is hysterical, Riker snarled, moving past Boyd, his eyes fixed on the counter, on the glass plate in the code book. Look at that. He has brainwashed her. Boyd laughed, a low, ugly sound. It does not matter what she says. She is a woman. He is a Comanche. My warrant is legal. He lunged forward, shoving Evelyn so hard she stumbled against the mail sorter. He grabbed the code book. This is railroad property. Stolen. Riker saw the glass plate. And what is this more of your proof? He laughed. He picked up the heavy negative. It is just glass. Before Evelyn could scream, Riker raised the plate high and smashed it down on the floor. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces. He ground the fragments under his boot heel, a vicious, crunching sound. No more pictures, he growled. Evelyn cried out, a sound of despair. It was gone. The fingerprint, the one piece of irrefutable proof. Gone. Now, Boyd said, turning to Tahan, a pair of handcuffs dangling from his hand. Put your hands behind your back, or I will shoot you where you stand. Tahan did not move. His eyes were on Evelyn, watching her. Do not do it, Tahan, Evelyn cried, pushing herself off the wall. He has no right. This is not justice. This is a lynching. You tell him, girl, Boyd said, walking toward Tahan. You tell him to come quiet, or he will hang right here, for all to see, for inciting the tribe, for attacking a federal officer. He reached for Tahan, but as he moved, he missed the flicker of movement at the counter. Mrs. Finch, who had been frozen in terror, moved with the speed of a striking snake. When Tahan and Evelyn had first entered, they had shown her the 2 plates they had taken. The first one, the clear one, the one with the fingerprint, and the second one, slightly blurred, a backup. Mrs. Finch, with a lifetime of dry goods sense, had held the good plate, her hand slipping it from the cloth as Evelyn produced the code book. And when Boyd's shadow filled the door, she had, in one smooth, practiced motion, dropped the good plate into the open barrel of flour that sat by her counter. Riker had smashed the backup. The real proof was safe, buried in white powder. Mrs. Finch looked at Evelyn. She did not nod. She did not move, but her eyes, for one fraction of a second, flickered to the flour barrel. Evelyn saw it. Hope, sharp and fierce, cut through her despair. It was not over, but Tahan was about to be chained. The noise had drawn a crowd. The street outside the post office was filling with men, drawn by the sounds of the confrontation. Hale's hired hands. The rough men from the saloon were shouting, "Drag the savage out! Get a rope!" But on the edge of the crowd, silent and watchful, stood others. Manuel Torres, his face hard, his rifle in his hand. The Svensson brothers, their homesteader neighbors, armed and grim. They said nothing. They just stood, a wall of silent judgment. The crowd was a powder keg. Evelyn, Tahan said, his voice low, his eyes never leaving hers. The key. She understood. Not a word, a look. He was not talking about the code. He was talking about the town. The prison wagon, a black iron cage on wheels, was standing right outside, the one Boyd had brought to haul him away. She had to make the choice. "Boyd, wait!" she shouted, her voice ringing with a new, desperate authority. "You cannot just arrest him, I demand. I demand to speak to the U.S. Marshal." It was a brilliant stall. Boyd paused. "The Marshal ain't here, girl." "Then you have to wait," she said, moving toward him, her hand near the desk. "I do not have to do anything," Boyd snarled, impatient. Turning his attention back to Tahan, that was the moment. Tahan moved. He did not attack. He exploded. He drove his head forward, a brutal, bone-jarring headbutt, straight into Boyd's soft stomach. The sheriff let out a huge, agonized woof of air, stumbling backward, his pistol firing uselessly into the ceiling. Tahan, in the same motion, pivoted. Riker was raising his own gun, but Tahan, cuffed hands or not, was faster. He swung his joined hands like a club, catching Riker across the jaw. The sound was a sharp, wet crack. Riker went down, crashing into a stack of mailbags, out cold. Evelyn did not wait. She snatched the heavy ring of keys from the hook on Boyd's desk. "The station!" she screamed. "Not this one, the railroad station!" They burst out the front door, into the stunned crowd. "They are escaping," one of Hale's men yelled. Recovering first, Tahan ran to the prison wagon, vaulting into the driver's seat. Evelyn was right behind him, scrambling onto the bench, her legs screaming. "The key!" She jammed the key into the heavy iron cuffs. They sprang open. Tahan grabbed the whip and the reins in one motion. He roared, a sound that was not human, a Comanche war cry that froze the blood. He lashed the horses. The wagon leaped forward, its iron wheels crashing, scattering the crowd. "They are heading for the station," a man yelled. "Stop them!" A half-dozen of Hale's men, already on horseback, spurred their animals, charging after the wagon. The railroad station was a mile out of town, across the rickety wooden bridge that spanned the dry, sandy bed of the Redwater's old channel. Tahan drove like a madman. The heavy wagon swayed and bounced, threatening to tip at every turn. Evelyn clung to the seat, her knuckles white. Behind them, the riders were gaining. They were lighter, faster. The leader of the chase was not Riker. It was his top man, a hard case named Colby. Colby's horse was fast, closing the distance, its hooves thundering on the hard pack. They hit the wooden bridge. The planks rattled and groaned under the wagon's weight. Colby was right behind them, drawing level, his pistol out. "I cannot steer and fight," Tahan yelled. Evelyn grabbed her own Winchester from the scabbard, but the wagon was bucking too hard to aim. Colby was alongside them now, on the bridge. He was reaching, trying to grab the reins of the lead horse. Tahan dropped the reins. He pulled his heavy skinning knife. He did not go for the man. He leaned far out from the bouncing wagon, a breathtaking act of balance. He sliced, not at Colby, but at the leather harness of Colby's horse. The thick bridle strap snapped. The horse, suddenly free of the bit on one side, screamed and reared. It veered violently, its legs tangling. Colby, his hand outstretched, had no time to react. He was thrown, not into the sand, but against the bridge's wooden railing. The railing splintered. The horse and rider toppled over the side, vanishing in a cloud of dust and splintered wood, crashing onto the hard, dry sand 20 feet below. The other riders pulled up, shocked, at the head of the bridge. Tahan and Evelyn were clear. They reached the railroad station, a small, lonely building next to the silent, gleaming tracks. They abandoned the wagon, Tahan grabbing Evelyn's arm, pulling her inside. A young telegraph operator, wearing a green eye shade, looked up from his key, his mouth open. "Get out!" Tahan said, his voice a low growl. The boy did not need to be told twice. He scrambled out the back door. Tahan slammed the heavy bar across the front door. He turned, breathing hard, and saw Mrs. Finch. She was already there, standing by the silent telegraph key. She must have run, cutting through the alleys, the moment they fled. She was holding a cloth bag, white with powder. "You took your time," she said, her voice trembling but firm. She pulled the flour-coated glass plate from the bag. "I trust, Miss Carter, you know what to say." Evelyn ran to the desk. The ledger, the code book was gone. She had to remember. "Yes," she said, her mind racing, pulling the codes from her memory. The Sentinel, the Omaha Herald, the Chicago Tribune, All of them. Get me the open line." Mrs. Finch, her hands steady, began to click the key, connecting, routing. Outside, the first of Boyd's men arrived, pounding on the door. "Open up. Boyd's orders." Tahan stood by the door, the bar holding. He had no gun. He had his knife. He looked at Evelyn. She sat at the key. Mrs. Finch stood aside. Evelyn's fingers, stained with chemicals and dirt, began to fly. Click, clack, click, click, clack, click. Copper Crossing. Hale Railroad fraud. Redwater Valley damned. False survey. False warrant. Send U.S. Commissioner. Urgent. Urgent. The pounding on the door became a rhythmic, crashing assault. They were using a log, a makeshift battering ram. "It is sending." "Mrs." Finch said, her hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "Wait for acknowledgement," Evelyn said, her eyes fixed on the key. The machine clicked back. Received. Omaha. Click. Received. Chicago. The door splintered. A crack appeared. "Tahan," Evelyn yelled. "Keep sending," he roared back. Click, clack, click. Philadelphia. Received. "It is done," Evelyn whispered. "They have it, all three." The door exploded inward, torn from its hinges. Sheriff Boyd stood there, his face purple, his clothes torn. He was flanked by a dozen men, their guns all raised, all pointed at Tahan and the two women. Boyd saw them. Tahan, standing by the broken door, his knife in his hand. Mrs. Finch, standing tall by her desk. And Evelyn, her hand still on the telegraph key, looking back at him, not with fear, but with a cold, clear, exhausted triumph. The clicking of the key echoed in the sudden, terrible silence. The truth was out. The silence in the small railroad station was 100 times louder than the crashing of the door. It was the silence of a dozen aimed rifles, of a dozen fingers on triggers. Sheriff Boyd, his face a mask of purple rage, his breath coming in ragged gasps, took a step inside. His eyes were locked on Tahan. "It is over," Boyd wheezed, tasting the victory. "The wire cannot save you now, boy. You will hang for murder, and you," he spat, glaring at Evelyn, "will be charged as his accomplice. Mrs. Finch, you are arrested for interfering with a federal warrant." Behind him, the crowd of Hale's men shifted, eager. But behind them, at the splintered doorway, the homesteaders had also arrived. Manuel Torres and the two tall Svensson brothers stood shoulder to shoulder, their own rifles held ready. "The wire went out. Boyd," Manuel called, his voice clear and steady. "The whole country heard it. You hang him. You hang an innocent man. You arrest her. You arrest the truth." "He is an armed fugitive," Boyd roared, turning, distracted by the challenge at his back. "Arrest those men. They are obstructing justice." "You are not justice," Evelyn shouted, her voice ringing. Tahan did not wait. He had seen the shift. Boyd was caught between two forces. He moved, not toward Boyd, but toward Evelyn. He grabbed her hand. "The back door, now." As Boyd turned back, Tahan was already moving, pulling Evelyn with him. He shoved the young telegraph operator's stool into the path of the nearest gunman and burst through the back door, the one the boy had used to flee. "Do not let them escape!" Boyd shrieked. A shot cracked, splintering the door frame as Tahan and Evelyn threw themselves into the dusty alley. They ran with the last of their strength, their footsteps echoing between the high wooden walls of the buildings. Behind them, they heard shouts, the confusion of Boyd's men caught between the armed homesteaders at the front and the escapees out the back. "The alley," Tahan gasped, pulling her left, "where we left the horses." They stumbled out of the narrow passage and into the wider alley behind the livery. The Mustang and the mare were still there, tied to the rail, their eyes wide with panic from the noise. Tahan sliced their reins free with his knife. He threw Evelyn into her saddle, his hands rough. "Ride!" He swung onto his Mustang's bare back just as the first of Boyd's men appeared at the end of the alley. A pistol fired. The bullet whined past Tahan's ear. He did not ride toward the Redwater. He did not ride toward her homestead. He spurred the Mustang hard, straight away from town, heading into the open, unknown scrubland, into the deepening twilight. Evelyn was right beside him, her mare flying over the hard, dry ground, her body low over the horse's neck. They rode as one shadow, fleeing the raw lights of Copper Crossing, disappearing into the vast, scrubbed emptiness of the plains. They rode for an hour, pushing the horses, the adrenaline a bitter fire in their throats. The pursuit fell back, disorganized, lost in the gathering dark. Tahan did not slow. He wove a path through dry arroyos, over low ridges, leaving a trail that only he could follow. The air changed. The world had been scoured by the dust storm. The sky rubbed raw. Now it was heavy, unstable. The wind, which had been so violent, died completely. The silence was absolute. A single drop of rain, cold and heavy, struck Evelyn's hand. Then another. Within a minute, the sky opened. It was not a gentle rain. It was a cold, driving downpour, the kind of summer cloudburst that follows a great drought. The dust on their skin turned instantly to mud. The world vanished in a solid, gray sheet of water. "We need shelter," Evelyn shouted, her voice swallowed by the roar of the rain. Tahan nodded, his face a mask of mud, his hair plastered to his skull. He was searching the landscape, his eyes reading the terrain even in the deluge. He pointed. There, an old stable, a line shack. It was a dark shape against the gray, a collapsing structure on a low rise, an old way station, abandoned when the railroad built its new path. They reached it, the horses slipping in the new, slick mud. The stable was a wreck, its main doors long gone. Half its roof open to the sky, but one corner, where the smithy's forge had been, still had a solid tin roof. They led the horses inside, into the darkness. The sound of the rain on the tin was deafening, a frantic, angry drumming, 1,000 hammers on an anvil. They stood in the dark, water streaming from them, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The race was over. They were, for this one moment, safe. The tension that had held them for 2 days, the tension of the chase, the fight, the escape, finally snapped. Evelyn began to shiver. It was not just the cold. It was the shock. Her leg, her side, her mind. It was all too much. Her teeth chattered. An uncontrollable, violent shaking. Tahan moved, his motions economical in the dark. She heard him rummaging in his sodden pack. A spark, a flash, and then the small, steady flame of a lantern. He found an old, broken one on the forge, and lit the wick. A circle of pale, golden light pushed back the gloom. It illuminated a small space, a ruined forge, a scattered pile of old horseshoes, and the two of them, caked in mud, looking like survivors of a flood. He unslung his heavy buffalo robe. It was soaked on the outside, but the thick inner wool was still mostly dry. He put it around her shoulders. It was heavy, and it smelled of him, of smoke and leather and horse. She clutched it, her shivering slowly easing under the sudden weight and warmth. She looked up at him. He was just standing there, watching her, his face streaked with mud, the lantern light carving deep shadows under his eyes. He looked as exhausted as she felt. "We are alive," she whispered, her voice a raw croak. "We are," he said. And then she broke. The tears came, hot and silent, cutting clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. It was the release of everything. The fear of Riker, the death of Silas, the terror of the stampede, the despair of the smashed plate, the hopeless final stand in the telegraph office. It all poured out of her. She did not sob. She just stood, wrapped in his robe, and let the tears fall. Tahan did not touch her. He did not offer useless words. He stood as he had in the storm, a solid, unmoving presence. He let her break. He let her be weak. He simply stood guard over her weakness. When the shiver of her tears finally subsided, he unhooked his waterskin from his belt and handed it to her. She drank. The water was cool and clean. She finished, wiping her mouth with the back of her muddy hand. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice thick. I am not usually so fragile." Tahan's face was unreadable in the lantern light. He took the waterskin back. "You are not fragile," he said, his voice low, rough. "I have scouted with soldiers. I have ridden with the best of my people. I have never known any man to have the courage you showed today. You are stronger than all of them." She looked at him, stunned. The compliment, coming from this man, this rock, landed with a physical force. It broke the last of her defenses. The fear and the adrenaline drained away. And in their place, something new and far more terrifying rose up. The drumming of the rain on the tin roof was the only sound. The small, golden light of the lantern created a world that held only the two of them. He was no longer just an ally. He was not just a partner. He was the man who had cleaned her wound. He was the man who had held her against his chest in the storm. He was the man who had stood, ready to die for her, in the station. She saw him, truly, for the first time. Not as a Comanche, not as a scout, but as Tahan. She took a step closer, her hand rising, her fingers, still trembling, touching the buckskin of his wet shirt. "Tahan," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He looked down at her hand, then up to her eyes. His gaze was intense, burning away all shadows. He did not move, but she felt the change in him, a stillness that was not calm, but charged. She was afraid, not of him. She was afraid of this feeling that was so new, so total. It was a surrender. She, who had fought so hard to be independent, to stand alone, was admitting that she did not want to stand alone ever again. Her lips parted, the words coming out on a trembling breath, a confession of her fear, her past, her hope, and her desire, all in one. "You're my first." The words hung in the warm, lantern-lit air. The rain roared outside. She had offered him the most vulnerable part of herself. Tahan did not speak for a long moment. He searched her eyes, seeing the truth of her statement, the terrifying, beautiful weight of it. Then, the harsh lines of his face softened. A smile touched the corner of his mouth, a rare, gentle expression that transformed him. He lifted his hand, not to her body, but to her face. His thumb, rough and calloused, brushed the last tear from her cheek. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. He rested his forehead against hers, a gesture of profound, equal intimacy. He closed his eyes. "And your last," he whispered. The words were not a threat. They were a vow, a promise. "I am the one. I choose you. I will be the only one you ever need." They stood like that for a long time, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. The roar of the rain on the tin roof was the sound of the world trying to break in. The small, steady light of the lantern was the world they had just built. A world of two, a world of a single promise. They did not kiss. They did not need to. This was deeper. It was the sealing of a bond, forged in dust and fire, and now sealed in water and light. Finally, he pulled back. Though his hand remained on her arm, the bond was there. It was solid. "We must rest," he said, his voice thicker now. "The dawn will come fast, and Hale will be at the dam." They sat on the buffalo robe, sharing the last of his dried meat. The rain outside softened, settling into a steady, rhythmic drumming. "Tahan," she said, her voice quiet. The new intimacy strange and wonderful. What happens after? Even if we win this, the commissioner comes, hail is stopped. What happens to us? She looked around the ruined stable. You are Comanche, I am a homesteader. I have my paper. You have the horizon. How can those two worlds? He knew what she was asking. He had been asking it himself. When I was a scout, he said, looking into the small lantern flame, I lived in the white world. I was not white. When I am with my people, I am Comanche. But I carry the white world with me. I have always been a man standing between two lodges. I did not belong to either. He looked at her. Until today, you said we needed both, your paper and my horizon. You were right. We do not have to choose. We build a bridge, she whispered, the words from their talk in the cave. A bridge, he nodded. My people must learn the paper. Your people must learn the horizon. We will be the ones to teach them. Your homestead. It is not a wall. It is an anchor. It is where the bridge starts. My people, they will be its guardians. It was a future she could not have imagined. A life not of solitude, but of connection. He reached into his shirt. He pulled out the small, worn buckskin pouch, the one he had carried since the valley. He untied the leather string and shook the contents into his palm. A single perfect feather from a golden eagle. He held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him, her eyes wide. Tahan, I cannot, it is sacred. It is your mother's. It is, he said. It is my path, my balance. He pushed his hand closer. I am not giving it to you to possess. It is not a thing to be owned. It is a thing that flies. She looked at him, confused. I am giving it to you, he said, his voice soft, to accompany me. So you know that my path is now your path. It is not a rope to hold you. It is a promise to fly together. Evelyn slowly reached out her hand. Her fingers, still stained with chemicals, closed over the feather. It was warm from his skin. She felt the strength of it, the promise of the sky. She closed her fist around it, holding it tight. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sudden silence was as profound as the promise just made. They rested, huddled together in the robes, not sleeping, but in a state of deep, exhausted peace. The hours passed. In the gray light just before dawn, Tahan stood. He moved to the opening of the stable and looked out. The world was scrubbed clean, the air sharp and new, smelling of wet earth and sage. The sky to the east was a pale, clear blue. It is time, he said. Evelyn stood, her body aching, her side on fire, but her heart was steady. She slipped the eagle feather inside her shirt, against her skin. They saddled the horses in the pale light. They did not speak. They moved as a team, their motions fluid, practiced. Tahan swung onto his Mustang. He looked down at her. The light was growing, catching the copper highlights in her hair. He held out his hand. She placed hers in it, and he pulled her up, seating her in front of him, just as he had in the storm. He did not want her to ride alone. He spurred the Mustang, and they rode out of the ruined stable, the mare trailing behind. They rode south, toward the Redwater Valley, toward the final confrontation. They rode as one, toward the rising sun. The rising sun was cold, the light a pale, watery yellow. They rode south, the Mustang moving with a long, steady gait. Evelyn seated in front of Tahan, her mare trailing behind. The world was washed clean, the air sharp and clear after the rain. The promise they had made in the darkness of the ruined stable was a solid, warm presence between them, a shield against the morning. As they topped the last rise overlooking the Redwater Valley, they saw that the world had already changed. The telegraph had been faster than a horse. The news, sent in a frantic clatter of code, had traveled across the country, and the country was now talking back. In Copper Crossing, Mrs. Finch was already receiving the replies. The Omaha Herald had a man on the train. The Chicago Tribune was demanding a statement from the railroad's head office. And the U.S. Land Commissioner, roused by the urgent plea from the Sentinel, had sent a message of his own he was coming, and he was sending a federal inspector ahead of him. Jasper Hale knew this. He had received a frantic, coded message from his own contacts in Omaha, the window of opportunity, the cover of lies and local power, was gone. The truth was coming on the 9 o'clock train. He had decided to act before the train arrived. When Tahan and Evelyn looked down, they saw Hale's final, desperate gamble. He was not just guarding the dam he had built in the storm. He was fortifying it. A crew of 20 men. Hale's roughest hands were working frantically. They were sinking thick wooden posts, stringing the new, vicious invention barbed wire. The sharp steel wires gleamed in the new light. A cruel fence designed to cut animals and men, sealing off the valley's entrance, making the stolen water a permanent conquest. Hale himself was there, on horseback, no longer the clean, polished investor, but a man driven by fury. He was shouting orders. Riker, his face swollen and dark with bruises from Tahan's blow in the station, was overseeing the crew, his one good arm urging them on. But Hale's men were not the only ones there. On the opposite bank of the dry creek bed, a second group had gathered. They were silent, watchful, and armed. Tahan recognized the tall, straight figure of Quanah, sitting on his war pony, his face impassive, watching the theft of his people's water. Beside him were a dozen Comanche warriors, not in paint, but carrying rifles, their presence a quiet, deadly promise. And with them, standing shoulder to shoulder, were the homesteaders. Manuel Torres was there, his rifle resting in the crook of his arm, his wife Maria and daughter Luz standing by a small wagon. The two blonde, giant Svensson brothers stood beside him, their expressions grim, and, arriving in a buckboard, was Mrs. Finch, her face set, carrying not a gun, but a handful of fresh telegrams. It was a citizen front, a line drawn in the mud of the new morning. Tahan spurred the Mustang down the long slope. All eyes turned. A shout went up from Hale's men as they recognized the horse, the Comanche, and the woman. Jasper Hale rode his horse forward, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "So," he called, his voice rough, "the fugitive returns, and he still has the woman." Tahan pulled his horse to a stop, letting Evelyn slide to the ground. She stood, her legs stiff, her side aching, but her gaze was locked on Hale. Tahan dismounted beside her. They walked forward together, stopping at the edge of the new, ugly wire. "I am not his captive, Mr. Hale," Evelyn said, her voice ringing in the clear air. "I am his partner." "You are a fool," Hale sneered. "And he is a dead man. Sheriff Boyd will be here any minute to arrest him for murder." "He murdered no one," Evelyn said. "But you did. You had my father killed. Your men killed Silas. And now you are killing the valley." She looked past him at the raw earth dam, a massive plug of rock and mud that held back the red water. Above the dam, the creek was already pooling, forming a large, muddy lake. Below it, the creek bed was dry, the fish already dying in the shrinking puddles. "You have to break it," Evelyn said. "The commissioner is coming. The telegraphs have gone out. It is over." Hale laughed, a short, ugly bark. "It is over when I say it is. This is my land. I have the survey." "You have a lie," she countered. She pointed to the crowd of homesteaders. "We have the truth. We have the proof." Hale's men had stopped working. They stood, holding their shovels and hammers, watching. This was not what they were paid for. "Get back to work," Riker roared, shoving one of the men. "String that wire." Evelyn turned to Manuel Torres. "Manuel, the sandbags. They use sandbags to plug the final gap." Manuel nodded. He and the Svensson brothers began walking forward, their rifles held loosely, their intentions clear. "Stop!" Riker yelled, drawing his pistol. "The first man who touches that dam gets a bullet." "You cannot shoot us all, Riker," Manuel said, his voice calm. "We live here. That is our water." He, the Svenssons, and two of Quana's men who had dismounted, walked past Riker toward the edge of the dam. "Evelyn," Tahan said, his voice low. "Hale's trick. The box." Evelyn saw it. Tucked near the base of the dam, half hidden, was a small wooden crate with wires running from it. Dynamite. "Hale," she screamed. "He has explosives." Hale smiled. "I am a railroad man. Miss Carter, I know how to move earth, and I know how to protect my property. If you do not get back, I will blow the dam, and your friends with it. It will be a tragic accident." The homesteaders stopped, frozen. Tahan looked at the crate. He looked at the sky. He looked at the muddy, pooled water. He sniffed the air. He smelled the damp. And something else. Failure. "The rain," Tahan said, his voice loud, for all to hear. "The storm last night. Your powder is wet. Hale, your trick is dead." Hale's smile faltered. He looked at the crate. He looked at Riker, his eyes wide with sudden doubt. "It is a bluff," Evelyn shouted to Manuel. "He is bluffing. Get the bags." Evelyn herself limped forward, ignoring her pain. She scrambled onto the edge of the dam, a wall of slippery mud and rocks, and grabbed the first heavy, sodden sandbag. She pulled, straining, and the bag moved. That broke the spell. Manuel and the Svenssons charged forward, tearing at the wall. "Stop them!" Hale shrieked. "Riker, stop them!" Riker ran onto the dam, his face a mask of fury. He shoved Evelyn hard. She fell backward, sliding down the muddy bank. Tahan was there before she landed, catching her, his face dark with a cold, controlled rage. He set her on her feet and turned. "Go," he said to her. "Help them. I will handle this." Tahan walked onto the dam, placing himself between Evelyn and Riker. The two men faced each other on the narrow, slick wall of mud. "I should have killed you in the canyon," Riker spat, his good hand gripping his pistol. "You could not," Tahan said. Riker lunged, not with the gun, but with his shoulder, trying to knock Tahan off balance, into the deep water pooling above the dam. Tahan did not move. He was rooted to the earth. He simply sidestepped. And Riker, his balance gone, stumbled, catching himself before he fell. Tahan hit him. It was not a punch. It was a fluid, brutal series of blows. Comanche hand-to-hand fighting. He struck Riker's wounded arm, breaking the sling. He struck his throat, his ribs. Riker gasped, swinging the pistol wildly. Tahan caught his wrist. The two men strained, locked together, their boots sinking in the slick mud. Riker's eyes were wide, panicked. He was strong, but Tahan was faster, his rage a cold, clean fire. Tahan twisted the wrist. A bone snapped. Riker screamed, the pistol falling from his numb fingers, plopping into the mud. Tahan was not finished. He spun Riker around, his arm locking around the man's throat, cutting off his air. He held him there, Riker's boots kicking uselessly. "Tahan, do not!" Evelyn screamed. Tahan held him for a second longer, the man's life in his hands. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at Hale, who watched, horrified. He looked at Quana, who watched, impassive. Then, with a sound of disgust, he threw Riker down. Riker landed in the shallow, muddy water below the dam, choking, defeated. Tahan picked up the pistol from the mud. He did not point it. He looked at Riker, who was kneeling, cradling his broken arm, his face a mask of humiliation. All the fight gone out of him. Tahan, in one powerful motion, bent the pistol's barrel against a rock, breaking the mechanism. He threw the useless metal at Riker's feet, "It is over," Tahan said. Riker looked at the broken gun. He looked at Tahan. Then he looked at Hale, who was watching him with undisguised contempt. Riker's spirit broke. "He paid me," Riker whispered, kneeling in the mud. "He paid me for it all. The stage, the fire at Torres's farm. All of it." At that moment, Sheriff Boyd arrived, riding hard, a fresh warrant in his hand. He was not leading a posse. He was alone. His authority was shattered. "What in God's name is going on?" he blustered, but his voice was weak. "Justice, Sheriff." "Mrs." Finch said, stepping forward. She held a fresh telegram. "This arrived 10 minutes ago, from the United States Land Commissioner. It says, and I quote, 'All land claims in the Redwater Valley are hereby frozen, all surveys suspended. All parties are to cease and desist any construction or fencing pending federal review. Any man interfering will be charged with defying a federal order.'" She looked pointedly at Hale, then at Boyd. Boyd's face went white. The warrant in his hand was now just a piece of paper. He was holding a fake order, while she held a real one. He looked at Hale's men, who had all stopped working. He looked at the homesteaders. He looked at the Comanche. He was alone. "Hale," Boyd stammered. "Mr. Hale, you said—" "It does not matter," Hale roared. His face was a terrible sight, the mask of civilization gone, leaving only the raw, consuming greed. He had lost his money, his power, his dam. It was all turning to mud. He looked at Evelyn. She was the one, the woman with her paper and her pictures. She had ruined him. He ripped his own pistol from its holster. "You!" he screamed. "You did this!" He aimed the gun straight at Evelyn's chest. Sheriff Boyd, his power gone, his world collapsing, hesitated. He did not move. Tahan was too far away. He lunged, but he would be too late. A rope snaked through the air. It came from the bank where the Comanche watched. Quanah, his face unchanged, had uncoiled the lariat from his saddle. He did not throw it at Hale. He threw it at the gun. The rope's heavy, braided end, weighted with a small post, struck Hale's arm with the force of a club. The gun fired, the bullet singing harmlessly into the sky. Hale shrieked, his arm numb, the pistol dropping to the ground. Tahan hit him. He came in low and fast, a tackle that drove all the air from Hale's body, slamming him backward into the mud. Tahan did not strike him. He did not use his knife. He pinned him, his knee on Hale's chest, his hands like iron on his wrists. The fight was over. Jasper Hale, the man of finance, the bringer of civilization, lay beaten in the mud, his clean suit ruined, his power broken, captured by the savage he had tried to destroy. Sheriff Boyd looked at the scene. He looked at Mrs. Finch's federal telegram. He looked at the dozens of witnesses. He slowly, deliberately, unpinned the star from his vest and dropped it into the dirt. Tahan rose, pulling a panting, defeated Hale to his feet. He shoved him toward Manuel. "Bind him!" Tahan walked over to Quanah. The old chief had not moved. He was already coiling his rope. Tahan stopped, standing before him. He said nothing. Quanah looked at Tahan. He looked at Evelyn, who had walked up to stand beside him. The old man's gaze was deep. Seeing everything, he looked at the broken dam, where the water was now, finally being freed, a small trickle turning into a stream. He nodded. "Once. You have fought well," he said in the Comanche tongue. "You have saved the water. You have found your bridge." The train whistle was a long, thin cry in the new, clean air. It was a sound of the outside world, the world of paper and law, and it was coming. At the dam, the standoff had dissolved into a weary, muddy tableau. Jasper Hale sat bound, his face a mask of dried mud and disbelief, guarded by Manuel Torres. The remaining of Hale's men, seeing their leader captured and their paymaster defeated, had simply dropped their tools and begun the long, quiet walk back to town. Sheriff Boyd, his star lying in the mud, sat on a rock, a broken, empty man. The federal commissioner, a man named Harcourt, arrived not in a carriage, but on the train itself. He was a tall, thin man from the east, wearing a black suit that seemed impervious to the prairie. He was not a fighter. He was a man of ledgers and absolute, quiet authority. He was flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals, men whose hard eyes showed they were not local and not for sale. Harcourt walked to the edge of the dam, his polished boots stopping just shy of the mud. He surveyed the scene, the bound Hale, the defeated Boyd, the armed homesteaders, the watchful Comanche, and the broken, trickling dam. He looked at Tahan and Evelyn, who stood together, coated in grime, the focal point of the strange alliance. "I am Commissioner Harcourt," he said, his voice as dry as old paper. "This area is now under federal jurisdiction." Boyd staggered to his feet. "Commissioner, thank God. This Comanche, Tahan, he is a murderer. I have a warrant." Harcourt cut him off with a single raised hand. "I have read the telegrams. Mr. Boyd, all of them. The ones you sent, and the ones Miss Carter sent." He turned to Riker, who was still kneeling in the mud, cradling his broken arm. "And I believe this is the man who can tell me whose murders we should be investigating." Riker, seeing his only chance, scrambled to his feet. "He is right. I will talk. I will be a witness. Hale. It was all Hale. He paid for the stage attack. He paid for the Torres fire. He paid for Silas's murder. I just did the work. I will testify to everything." Harcourt nodded, as if this was the most predictable thing in the world. "Marshal, take Mr. Hale and Mr. Boyd into custody. They will be transported to Omaha to await trial. Mr. Riker will be held as a material witness." As the marshals cuffed a silent, trembling Boyd and a sputtering, furious Hale, Harcourt turned to Evelyn. "Miss Carter, I believe you have something for me. A glass plate." Evelyn looked at Tahan, then at Mrs. Finch, who had walked over from her buckboard, her face pale but triumphant. Mrs. Finch was holding the cloth bag, still white with flour. "It is in the post office, sir," Mrs. Finch said. "In the flour barrel. I kept it safe." "You did well, madam," Harcourt said. He turned to Evelyn. "Your testimony, and that of the homesteaders, will be required. As for you," he said, his gaze falling on Tahan, "the warrant for your arrest is void. Your actions, while irregular, appear to have been in the service of justice. You are a free man." Harcourt spent the next 2 days in Copper Crossing. He sealed the telegraph office. Collecting the coded ledgers, he took possession of the flour-dusted glass plate, wrapping it in silk. He interviewed Manuel Torres, the Svensson brothers, and even Quana, with Tahan and Evelyn acting as translators. The town, stripped of its corrupt leadership, held its breath. On the 3rd day, the work of healing began. The dam, now a federal crime scene, was ordered dismantled. But it was not the marshals who did the work. Tahan and his people, and Manuel and the Svenssons, met at the dam. There were no orders given. They simply began to work, shoulder to shoulder. They tore apart the wall of rock and mud. They pulled the sandbags. They ripped out the barbed wire. The water, which had been a muddy, sullen lake, surged free. It poured into the dry bed of the red water, a brown, churning, joyous flood. It filled the gullies, soaked the cracked earth, and raced downstream. Evelyn and Tahan stood on the bank, watching it run. The sound of the river's return was the sound of a promise kept. 2 days later, the buffalo came back. They came from the west, a dark river of fur, sensing the water's return, and moved into the valley to graze. The land was healing. Now, the people had to... A week after Hale's arrest, a large council tent was pitched on the prairie. It was not in the Comanche summer camp, and it was not near the homesteads. It was on the high, open ground between them. Inside, The air was thick with the smell of sweetgrass and coffee. Quanah sat on one side, flanked by Tahan and the elders. On the other sat Manuel Torres, the two Svensson brothers, and a half-dozen other homesteaders. Evelyn sat in the middle, a pen and a fresh ledger in her lap. "The water is free," Quanah began, his voice low. Tahan translating. "The water is for all. It cannot be owned. It cannot be fenced." "We agree," Lars Svensson said, his voice a deep rumble. "But our crops, we need the water too, and our animals need the grass." "There is grass for all," Tahan said, "if the herds are not too large, and if they do not trample the corn." They talked for hours. It was not the fast, sharp talk of white men. It was a slow, deliberate counsel. They spoke of the seasons. They spoke of the old markers. They spoke of respect. By the time the sun began to set, they had an agreement. Evelyn wrote it all down. The homesteaders would not graze their cattle east of the Red Water during the Comanche summer, protecting the tribe's sacred ground. The Comanche agreed to keep their vast horse herds from the fields of new corn, and all of them, Comanche and homesteader, swore a shared oath to protect the old survey stones, the real markers, from any new railroad or land agent. When it was done, Quanah and Manuel Torres put their marks on the paper, then the Svenssons, then Tahan. It was not a federal treaty. It was a covenant, a neighborhood agreement, sealed by fire and water. Life began to settle. The sound of hammers echoed in the valley, but it was not the sound of fences. It was Manuel Torres, with Tahan and the Svenssons at his side, rebuilding his barn. Children, Luz Torres and a few shy Comanche girls, were seen playing by the newly flowing creek. In town, Mrs. Finch had taken the second glass plate, the blurry one that Riker had smashed, and carefully glued its largest pieces back together. She framed the shattered image and hung it on the wall of the post office, a stark, silent reminder of what had almost been lost. Tahan's name was cleared, but his status was new. He was no longer just a scout, nor just one of Quanah's warriors. He was the man who spoke both languages, the man who understood both paper and the horizon. He was the mediator. When a homesteader had a dispute, he sought Tahan. When the tribe had questions about the new federal agents, they sent Tahan. He was the bridge. Evelyn, her leg and side now healing into scars, returned to her sod house. She sat at her small wooden table for 2 days, writing. She was not just a reporter now. She was a witness. Her article, published a week later in the Sentinel and reprinted in Omaha, was titled "The Steel Road and the Grass Field." It was not a tale of triumph. It was a quiet, powerful story about a community that had refused to be divided. She did not call Hale a villain. She called his greed a sickness. She did not call Tahan a hero. She called him a protector. She wrote of the labor of Manuel Torres, the quiet integrity of Mrs. Finch, and the wisdom of Quanah. She wrote that the West would not be won by the barbed wire and the survey line, but by the people who learned to share the water. The fight was over. The valley was safe. And Tahan was in agony. He stood outside her sod house, repairing the section of fence that had been trampled during the storm. The work was simple. His hands were strong. He set a new post, tamping the earth around it, his movement sure. He looked at the sod house. It was solid. It was safe. It was warm. It was her world, the world of paper and walls and a lantern burning in the window. He loved the woman inside that house more than he loved the air he breathed. But the walls choked him. He finished his work and straightened up. He looked past the house, past the small, fenced-in claim, to the wide, endless horizon. The sky was a sharp, clear blue, and a single hawk was riding the high currents. He felt the pull, a physical ache in his chest, the urge to be on his horse, to be moving, to be part of the wind and the grass. He was a man of the horizon. He did not know how to be a man of the fence. He had promised her, "And your last." He would not break his word. But he feared that in keeping it, he would lose himself. He would become a tame man, a man who fixed fences on a small patch of dirt, his spirit trapped in a 160-acre cage. Evelyn came out of the house, wiping her inky fingers on a rag. She did not speak. She walked to him, her limp now barely noticeable. She saw the set of his shoulders, the direction of his gaze. She knew. She had seen him watching the hawks all week. She stopped in front of him. Her hand was closed. "I have been thinking," she said, her voice quiet. He braced himself. He thought she would ask him to stay, to build a room onto the soddy, to put his mark on her paper. "I have been thinking about what you said," she continued, "about your path." She opened her hand. Lying in her palm was the single golden eagle feather. He looked at it, and his heart broke. She was giving it back. She was releasing him. She understood that he could not be the man who fixed her fences. She was setting him free, and it was the last thing in the world he wanted. "Evelyn," he began, his voice thick. "You gave this to me," she said, cutting him off, her voice steady. "To accompany you." "Yes," he said, his voice low. "My path. It is not this." He gestured to the fence. "The house." "I know," she said. She did not hand him the feather. Instead, she reached up and tucked it, firm and secure, into the leather tie of his hair. She put it back where it belonged. He looked at her, confused, his heart hammering. "I am not holding you back, Tahan," she said, her hands coming to rest on his chest. "I am not asking you to live inside my walls." She smiled, a slow, sure smile that held all the promise of their night in the stable. "I am going with you. Your path is the horizon. My path is the truth on paper. We will walk them together. Sometimes we will be here, mending this fence, and sometimes—" She looked up at the hawk. "We will be out there, following that river. Your home is the valley. My home is this homestead. But our home," she pressed her hand flat against his heart, "is the bridge we build between them, every single day." He looked down at her, seeing her, really seeing her. She was not asking him to choose. She was not giving him up. She was choosing everything. She was choosing the two paths, the two worlds, without fear. The tightness in his chest vanished, replaced by a rush of feeling so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He was not a man trapped between two lodges. He was a man who, for the first time in his life, belonged to both. He pulled her to him, his arms wrapping around her, lifting her off the ground. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in. He was anchored, and he was, at last, completely free. They stood on the hill of new grass, the one that looked down upon the Redwater Valley. It was late autumn. The land was healed, the scars of the dam and the false fences slowly fading back into the earth. The valley was no longer a place of conflict. It was a mosaic. Down by the creek, the white, conical shapes of Comanche teepees clustered in the shelter of the cottonwoods, their smoke rising in thin, straight lines. Further up the slope, the sharp, new lumber of Manuel Torres' rebuilt barn caught the afternoon light, and the sod roofs of the homesteads looked like they had grown from the prairie itself. The two worlds were not fighting. They were neighbors. The water, clear and steady, ran between them, a shared, pulsing vein. The ceremony was held not in a church, but under the vast, open sky, the sky that had witnessed their entire struggle. It was simple, rooted in the earth. Quana, his face a map of 1,000 winters, stood as Tahan's witness, his presence a blessing from the land itself. Manuel Torres, his rifle now leaning against his own fence post, stood as Evelyn's, a quiet testament to the new, hard-won community. There was no preacher. The wind was their only minister. Tahan did not give her a ring of gold. He gave her a single, thick braid of his own black hair, tied with sinew and a small, turquoise bead that had been his mother's. It was the Comanche way, a tie of his spirit to hers, a promise to be part of her path. Evelyn gave him a ring. It was not diamond. It was a simple, heavy band of hammered silver, one she had purchased from an old Mexican smith in Copper Crossing. She had paid for it with the money from her article. The steel road and the grass field. It was paper and ink. Her truth turned into a solid, unbroken circle. Quana spoke, his voice low, thanking the Creator for the return of the water, for the healing of the people, and for the building of the bridge. Manuel Torres said a short prayer in Spanish, asking for a blessing on the house and on the horizon. That night, the fires were not separate. The homesteaders and the Comanche gathered in the big meadow, a single, large circle of celebration. They danced. The tall, blonde Svensson brothers, large and endearingly awkward, tried to follow the shifting, complex rhythm of the Comanche drums. Luz Torres, her hand now completely healed, laughed as the Comanche children pulled her into the spinning circle. Tahan and Evelyn sat together, watching, their hands locked, the firelight dancing in their eyes. She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the smell of wood smoke in the clean, cold night air. "Tahan," she whispered, her voice for him alone, lost in the sound of the drums. "When I was in the stable, that night, when I said, 'You're my first,'" he turned his head, his hair, the eagle feather still tied in it, brushing her cheek. He waited. "I was not just talking about being young," she said, her voice soft, but strong and sure. "I was not talking about what a woman gives a man. I meant it was the first time, the very first time in my whole life. I had truly chosen. I was not surviving. I was not my father's daughter. I was not a woman running from a past. I was choosing, and I chose my freedom. And I chose you. I chose them together." Tahan looked into the flames, seeing the memory of her face, streaked with mud, trembling in the lantern light. He lifted her hand, the one with the plain silver band, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "And I told you," he whispered back, his voice thick, "that I would be your last, not because I'm a man who owns you, not because I would put a fence around you." He turned, his dark eyes holding hers, the fire of the promise still burning. "It is because I chose you before the horizon itself. For me, there is nothing after you. You are the final marker. You are my home." The rhythm of the valley became a new song. In the far distance, from the lights of Copper Crossing, they could sometimes hear the faint, high, metallic clicking of the telegraph key. Mrs. Finch was busy, talking to the world, sending Evelyn's new reports, ordering seeds for the homesteaders, and checking the schedules for the U.S. Marshals. It was the sound of the new world, the world of paper and iron. And from the high plains, in the deep of the night, would come the answering thunder, the sound of Tahan's mustangs, the wild herd, running free under the moon. It was the sound of the old world, the world of grass and wind. The sounds did not fight. They existed together, a rhythm of wire and hoof, of change and of freedom, side by side. The bridge they had promised became real, built of simple, daily acts. When the deep snows of winter came, the Comanche moved their winter camp into the sheltered woods of the valley. In Evelyn's sod house, which Tahan and the Svenssons had helped her expand with a new room built of solid timber, she started her school. It was not a mission school, preaching one God. It was a valley school. Luz Torres sat next to two shy Comanche boys, their braids hanging down their backs. Lars Svensson's youngest daughter, her hair white blonde, shared a slate with the blacksmith's son from town. Evelyn taught them their letters. She taught them how to read the newspapers. She taught them how to write their names, how to do sums, and how to understand the lines on a map. She taught them the power of the written truth. And in the summer, when the grass was high and the land was warm, Tahan took the children. He took them from the wooden benches of the schoolroom and led them out onto the prairie. He taught them how to read the clouds. He taught them how to find water. He taught them how to track a deer, and how to know which plants would heal them. He taught them how to listen to the language of the horizon. They were raising a new generation, one that could read both a book and the sky. One afternoon in the late fall, when the cottonwood trees along the red water had turned a brilliant, burning gold, Tahan and Evelyn rode out alone. They rode to a specific grove of trees, a place where the earth was soft, near the spot where they had first hidden from Riker's men. Tahan dismounted, taking a small shovel from his saddle. He was carrying a bundle, wrapped in canvas. "What is it, Tahan?" Evelyn asked, sliding from her mare. He did not answer. He walked to the base of the largest cottonwood, its roots planted deep in the valley's new, peaceful earth, and he began to dig. He dug a deep, square hole. He unwrapped the bundle. Inside was the false survey marker, the white, chiseled stone, the lie that had almost destroyed them. Commissioner Harcourt had given it to her as a token when he left, a relic of the fight. Tahan took the heavy, square stone, and he placed it in the hole. "This was their paper," he said, his voice low. "A lie, written in rock." Evelyn knelt beside him. She took a handful of the rich, dark, damp earth. "And this is the truth," she said, letting the soil fall onto the stone. Together, they buried the marker. They buried the lies, the greed, the false maps. They covered it with earth, tamping it down, letting the land reclaim the lie. When they were finished, Tahan scattered a handful of golden leaves over the spot. It was gone. They stood, hand in hand, under the canopy of the trees, the air still and peaceful. They rode back to the hill overlooking their valley, the air smelling of wood smoke and the promise of a good winter. The West was still a hard land. It was still a place of wind and dust and struggle. But looking down at the two worlds living side by side, at the white canvas teepees and the brown lumber houses, they knew the fight for this land had not been won by a lone hero. This West did not need lone heroes. It just needed people, strong enough and brave enough to stand together. The sun set, a deep, liquid red, and its light poured over the valley, touching the fields and the lodges. It turned the red water into a ribbon of liquid gold. It was not an ending. It was the promise of a harvest. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, Wild West Tales, and please give this video a like. And if you really enjoyed it, supporting the story by pressing the hype button helps more than you know.